I'm going to call to order the August 6th meeting of the Eugene Water and Electric Board. I'm going to start with a quick safety briefing for those of us in the room. Thanks everybody for being here for tonight's board meeting. EWEB management and subject matter experts are present in the room and virtually, and the meeting is live streamed and recorded. Thankfully, with these microphones, we don't have to speak loudly anymore. Hopefully everybody in who are here tonight can hear us all right. Please speak up if you have any trouble hearing us. Public testimony is welcome. Signed forms are available at the back of the room. For those of you who are here tonight to provide testimony, we're scheduled to begin public input at 5:50, but please make sure and sign up. Visitor access is limited to the board meeting room and the restrooms. The restrooms are located on the first floor. Please exit through the interior door here in the back, and a security officer will direct you to the restrooms. In the event of an emergency, please follow instructions given by staff. And if evacuation is required, please proceed to the nearest safe exit as identified by staff and evacuate away from the building to allow first responders to access the building. And with that, we'll start with an agenda check. Any questions, changes on the agenda? Nope. Hearing none, I'm going to go to items from board members and general manager. John?
So what I'd like to comment on the grounds. I see a lot of properties that I know EWEB owns, but we don't use. I think the ground maintenance crew is doing an outstanding job. They're removing all the signs that are there illegally. They're keeping them mowed. They're keeping the vegetation down, and I don't think I've ever seen a better job of doing that. So I just like to make sure that the staff knows that that's noticed. Number two, I had a recent incident, not an incident, but an inquiry from a riverfront property owner that has a legal non-conforming use septic system, 10 to 15 feet from the water, very close to our intake. And he applied for grant money from ARPA money that there's 2 pots of gold, and nothing in our information says there's an income requirement. So he applied and they said you make too much money. Well, my point is that riverfront property is the most expensive property in the county. You have to make money to afford it. And if we want to incentivize people to replace these systems that are causing threats to the integrity of our water system, why aren't we funding? And even if it's not the ARPA money that has 80%, Matt said it's an 80% income requirement. If you don't mind telling me that, I mean, you gave me a good explanation saying it's not your rule, it's the DEQ's rule, but it makes no sense because there are a lot of people up there that I know have qualified and they've got very large assets, but they just draw Social Security, so they meet the income requirement and they get the grants. And other people that are being honest, trying to be proactive and move in this septic system away from the water that's down by Hendricks Bridge, which is close to intake, doesn't get funded. So, you know, that's something that's dear and near to my heart. And then the last thing on my inquiry about the money that we spend, it's part of the relicensing, 50 grand, $250,000 every 5 years for a game officer for the Forest Service up on the upper river. And I asked, do we know what they do? The last time we checked, we found out they were using the money for trail maintenance. And they're supposed to be using it for fish and game enforcement because they do have the power to cite. So why don't we at least ask them to tell us if they've ever even issued a citation or if they're even patrolling? Because I hate to say this, but maybe I don't trust what they're using that money for. $250,000. So if you could follow up with me on that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Others?
Just had a good meeting with the City of Eugene leadership the last week, and I think Frank will probably touch on that in his report, but Matt and myself and Frank and Sarah Maderi, the mayor, and Councilor Groves had a meeting last week, and I think it went very productive. They're very happy with the liaisons between staffs and electeds. That went well.
Well, my big experiment is to try out the mobile mic this evening. So if you can't hear me, I'll have to switch technologies. But I think we can probably move into correspondence unless you had something, President McCray. So, Commissioners, there were 2 items of correspondence. The first one had to do with a preview of the annex, EWEB's annex to the Lane County's Natural Hazards Mitigation Plan. Our present joint plan with the city expires in early 2025. This plan will have to be filed by Lane County to the federal agencies. It's part of the requirement to receive reimbursement and grant funds. We did add, you'll note in the background memo, we did add a few new hazards that we're mitigating for, such as some additional pump stations on the water side, just for example. And so if you had feedback or questions, please get back to me on that. If you have specific questions or comments on that, we'd be happy to work with you on that, or we can discuss that during our check-ins. The second item of correspondence had to do with our registration of the Trail Bridge generating facility. This is part of the Carmen project overall, but the plan according to the license was to reduce the capacity of the Trail Bridge generator itself from roughly 5 megawatts to 1 megawatt. That was part of the original license agreement. And thus we are in essence registering that so that Bonneville can lower our net requirement increase our net requirement according to cover that particular reduction in capacity. And so that was really an informational item for commissioners. And if you had further questions on that, we'd be happy to answer those as well.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions on the Trail Bridge one. So one deadline is October 2024. I know we've been having some issues with staffing and stuff like that. Is there any problems with us meeting that?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. And then the second question on that is, so we're gonna tell BPA that we're taking Trail Bridge offline, basically, as part of our license settlement. So Trail Bridge is rated at 10 megawatts. But we're actually doing 3.3 megawatts on average out of there. Will we be eligible for the full 10 megawatts of the lower power rate, or how does that calculation work?
I'll answer, but you can answer that better than I can.
The amount of power on our exhibit A with Bonneville is what matters, not the nameplate of the generator. The amount of power on that exhibit A is based on critical water year. I'm gonna get super nerdy, bear with me, which is a 1 in 10 bad water year. I believe that's, you said 3.3 megawatts. That sounds correct. So the 3.3 is the amount we would be eligible to replace.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments on correspondence? I just have one item. I just want to acknowledge the Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan Annex 1. I think it's great that we're putting this underneath Lane County's plan. I think that's a solid move. And as somebody who has worked on these plans before, I just want to thank the team, Sarah and Rod and Janine, who worked on this. It's a lot of work, and what's provided here is really solid. So thank you.
Yep, we'll pass that on. And if you have any comments or questions on either of these items, just let me know. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Anything else? All right, we're going to move on to public input then. We're a little bit ahead of time. If folks show up, please make sure that we get them signed up. I have 9 people here in the room who are prepared to provide testimony. So I'm going to give a very quick description here. Just welcome to the public input session for this meeting. EWEB is a public, not-for-profit organization whose charter is to deliver drinking water and electricity to our community. Although this forum is not used for an open back and forth dialogue, commissioners and staff value hearing diverse perspectives and receiving community input. Speakers are asked to keep their testimony relevant to EWEB business and request that everyone share their comments in a productive and respectful manner. Should speakers or audience members become disruptive, they may be muted or removed from the meeting. At this time, we have 9 folks here in person. When your name is called, you'll have up to 3 minutes. There's a clock here in the front of the room. You'll have 3 minutes to provide your comments. And that's all. I appreciate the respectful testimony this evening. So with that, I'll start the public input session now opening. So we'll start with Charlie Love, and that'll be followed by Joe Mall.
Is it here, I take it?
Please, thanks.
Very good. Good evening, everyone. My name is Charlie Loeb. I am a resident of Ward 2. I am here representing the Emerald Valley Electric Vehicle Association, and as a long-time active member in that organization, thanks to EWEB for all the support you've given to the transition to electric vehicles over the years, and rebates, grants. We've received money from you to education programs. It is awesome. That is why we've been somewhat disturbed recently to find that EWEB has a policy that's actually working against this goal we have as a community to run more cars off of electricity. That is, when folks are installing a level 2 residential charger at home, they are asked to contact EWEB Distribution Engineering. And if according to the policy, if that distribution engineering determines that this is going to place a significant enough load on the local grid that upgrades to the neighborhood service is required, then that person installing the level 2 charger can be liable for covering that cost. There is some EWEB grant money to offset it. Nonetheless, it seems extremely unfair. You know, why target just those people installing level 2 residential EV chargers as opposed to anyone installing any other kind of 240 volt load? Why is it the last person who pushes the neighborhood over the threshold gets billed instead of the 10 people who may have installed level 2 chargers ahead of them? And, you know, this is becoming a point that at which, you know, we've heard of auto dealers talking to their customers and saying, oh yeah, if you want to install a level 2 charger, be aware you may get a huge bill from EWEB for the cost of doing that, which then discourages EV adoption altogether. I sent a letter to my ward commissioner. A few of the rest of us also sent letters to our commissioners. Our president, Phil Barnhart, sent a letter to the general manager and all the commissioners, which I brought copies of here in case it didn't get well distributed or you didn't see it. And we're really looking for a response. We haven't heard, we started these contacts 2 or 3 months ago. We haven't received any kind of word about how the commission, or even if it's just a staff level issue that can be resolved at that level. This is pretty minor compared to everything you deal with, but it's really important to us. And we intend to kind of keep pushing this. We're going to be back asking about this till we get either some good answers about why this policy is in place, or hopefully, and our preference would be to see the policy changed so that we're not penalizing those folks who are installing level 2 electric vehicle chargers at their homes. And with that, I don't know where the best place is to hand off these. I've got the 8 copies. I can just pass a few of them down the front aisles here. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Loeb. And next is Joe Mall, followed by Dan Patch.
Good evening, everyone. For the record, I'm Joe Mall. I'm the Executive Director of the Mackenzie River Trust. And I come before you today to thank you for EWEB's consistent investment in the health of the Mackenzie River watershed and the community that depends on it. And I come before you also to encourage the expansion of your vision to include the Middle Fork and Coast Forks of the Willamette in line with the significant investment you are making in water resiliency with the second source, Willamette River water plant that's moving closer to reality. On your agenda this evening is a consideration of updates to your strategic plan, including the expansion of the idea that customer owners to that instead of the larger community, which I laud. I know that as a board and utility subject to regulatory expectations, you must pay attention to what paying customers and members like me need and desire. But at the same time, I appreciate that for 20 years, I've worked side by side in the field and around a lot of these tables with EWEB staff, and their eyes are consistently on the larger community. Getting your strategic plan language in line with that reality is an important thing, something that is both reassuring and energizing. In that same strategic plan discussion, you'll consider a mental shift away from watershed recovery to watershed protection. Staff leadership, again, in the aftermath of the Holiday Farm fire has been exemplary, not just in its creativity and success in securing financial and other resources for recovery, but just in the day-to-day commitment that they have shown to tackling challenging problems and opportunities from community recovery to land and water conservation, which you supported. including both protection, buffering the rivers from our influences, and stewardship, the long-term care of this place. Writing by committee is the worst thing ever, but nonetheless, I'll suggest one change. You might consider perhaps watershed conservation rather than watershed protection, because again, I think that better reflects the range of efforts that EWEB has supported and led for decades, at least that I've been here. Which brings me to the future of the Coast Fork and Middle Forks of the Willamette, which join just above the site where EWEB will begin drawing water in the years ahead. Mackenzie River Trust, Coast Fork Watershed Council, the Middle Fork Willamette Watershed Council, Friends of Beaufort Park, Mount Pisgah Arboretum, the Upper Willamette Soil and Water Conservation District, Willamette Lane Parks District, Springfield Utility Board, Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, Lane County. There's a long list of partners already vested in investing in the health of those two tributaries. I encourage you to invest as deeply in these partnerships as you have done going forward. There are large gains to be made in water quality and watershed health there. And over the years, I know you've queried your ratepayers about funding commitments, even surcharges for watershed protection. They have always responded. We have always responded positively. People see the value of investing in the source, but more, I truly believe they see the value of investing in the larger community. I know you're nervous about the overall rate increases needed for the utility. That's fine and responsible to be thoughtful. Let's just continue to be smart about watershed investment. It's a high return investment for the rivers, for those of us whose taps use supply, and for the many people who will call these watersheds home for the next 100 years. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Mull. Dan Patch, followed by Jim New.
I'd like to challenge you to start being more honest. You want the public support, you want rate increases. You have a real problem with your image. For decades, you've done nothing but lie to us. You've cheated us. You've misled us. You have contempt for us when we speak. You act like somehow we don't have any right to even hear what you have to say. You set this room up in such a way that you're talking to each other, but we're on the wings. We're not part of the process. This process right here is ridiculous because there's no actual exchange. You can just forget what we say the second we say it. We have no voice. And I think it's your responsibility to give us that voice. We are supposed to be in control of this, and we haven't been for decades. Your secret contracts that cost us millions of dollars, you won't disclose the details of them. Your constant rate increases to enrich yourselves with your employee benefits, and your non-stopping construction with absolutely, you never actually put a bid proposal together for us. You're actually bringing in so much money, you can just put up buildings like this without even having to talk to us about it. We have no control of what you do, and it's been that way for decades. It's obvious that you have contempt for us. We're in the way. We're in the way of your greed, and it's your responsibility to fix it. And I think I speak for tens of thousands of Eugenians that are frustrated and tired of this circus that's been going on for decades. And they're just so pathetically tired of it, they won't even show up here because we do it year after year and nothing ever changes. This is the same conversation that I had over 15 years ago. And you're still doing the same behavior, enriching yourself, ignoring us, and building an empire. And I think it's time for it to stop. It really is. It's criminal. It's thuggery, intimidating people with penalties and fines as almost borderline on fascism. It's disgusting. You have nothing but contempt for us when we ask you to speak up. We're not part of this process because we're on the wings. Do something. It's your job. Otherwise, don't take the job. Stop serving the administration. Serve the public.
Thank you, Mr. Patch. Next is Jim New, followed by Peter Dragovich. Thoughts?
I'm here with a smile. Chair McCray, EWEB commissioners and staff, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jim New. I live in Ward 7. Eugene Airport submitted 2 applications in May to Oregon Department of Energy for Community Renewable Energy Program grant funding of community resilience projects. EWEB Customer Solutions wrote a letter of support for the ODOE Community Renewable Energy Program, stating it would be a welcome invitation to the city of Eugene's energy resources. We thank you, 350 Eugene, thanks you for that support. The grants submitted by the airport staff are a $100,000 ODOE Community Renewable Energy Program planning grant for the development and design of 8 dual electric vehicle chargers and an associated solar energy array, a $100,000 ODOE Community Renewable Energy Program grant for a proposed renewable and resilient project to explore feasibility of pairing a photovoltaic power plant and battery storage with microgrid control and a digital management system. The second grant was in collaboration with 350 Eugene through its solar consultant Reimagine Power. According to Airport Director Catherine Stevens, these 2 grants have been moved up in the ODOE consideration process, and a final decision is due in early September. One of the top 6 themes City of Eugene Sustainability Manager Ian Penn presented at the July 10th Council Electrification Work Session was to ensure clean, reliable, and affordable energy, such as community solar and geothermal energy network. A photovoltaic system with battery storage and microgrid controls, coupled with a digital energy management system, would provide the Eugene Airport with clean backup power during a Cascadia subduction zone event or other major disaster. We look forward to ODOE's decision on these grants and hope the airport and the city of Eugene can benefit from financial assistance of state renewable energy funding. We hope EWEB will continue to be supportive of this renewable energy sourcing and project at the airport. On another note, I support Mr. Loeb's testimony and also am an EVEVA member. I also reached out to board members regarding the EV charger rebate possibly occurring more costs than the rebate provides, and I got no response as well, and I hope EWEB addresses the EV charger rebate costs. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. New. Next is Peter Dragovich, followed by Danny Noonan.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Peter Dragovich. I'm a ratepayer and a resident of Ward 5. I request you develop an effective community solar program. Community solar programs allow any ratepayer, owner, renter, or business to receive credit for solar energy from publicly or privately installed solar panels. The ratepayer does not need to install any panels, and many cannot because of expense, renter status, inadequate orientation of a building, shade, or other reasons, but everyone can participate in community solar. Your existing solar incentives would be enhanced by adding a community solar program, and 2 important objectives would be achieved: increased production of renewable energy and improvement of EWEB's low income-based assistance programs. There are many examples in Oregon and across the nation where utility-sponsored community solar brings 10% or more reductions in electricity bills for low-income ratepayers. Ashley Municipal Electric Utility offers a community solar program where low-income electric users can save $500 a year off their energy bill via a lottery system. And there is the state-authorized community solar program that provides rate relief of 10.4% off electricity bills to all participating low-income households. Per state law, that program is only offered by the large investor-owned utilities, but there's no reason why EWEB could not copy components from it and draw from examples statewide and nationwide to give rate relief to low-income Eugene households while increasing carbon-free generation. The current upgrade to EWEB's billing system may be an opportunity to facilitate community solar, and there is an important tie-in to the City of Eugene's decarbonization efforts, where the need to reduce the cost of decarbonization on low-income households is currently being discussed. A majority of electric utility ratepayers in the state already have access to community solar programs that give rate relief to low-income ratepayers. Let's have one here that would benefit everyone in our community and beyond.
Next is Danny Noonan, followed by Micah Anton.
President McCray and EWEB commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to give comment. My name is Danny Noonan. I'm a climate and energy strategist with the local nonprofit Breach Collective, and I'm a renter and resident of Ward 7 in the Whitaker. At July's meeting, I gave public comment regarding a letter that was sent by 18 community organisations calling for expanded low-income electrification subsidies, more progressive and equitable rate design reforms, and improved community outreach and engagement. Ahead of the rate design directional discussion that's on the agenda for this evening, I wanted to come back and offer some brief comments arising out of those letters' recommendations. So regarding the rate design principle of sufficiency that was discussed in the memo prepared for that discussion, I'd like to comment that EWEB should be cautious not to think or operate too much like an investor-owned utility when it comes to designing its rates. Public utilities are public for a reason and do not have identical legal and financial obligations to investor-owned utilities. For example, profits or shareholder dividends are not considerations for public utilities. This alone should allow EWEB to go further and be more creative in keeping customer rates lower than IOUs are able to do. EWEB's Climate Guidebook version 2.0 states in several places that keeping rates low is climate action, and climate action should be an imperative that EWEB balances in determining what rates are necessary for operational sufficiency. I also want to comment on the rate design principle of efficiency and the memo's reference to rate and payment choices that support, quote, smart electrification. This term does not appear to be defined in the memo or in the Climate Guidebook. But I did notice that EWEB has, at least in the recent past, had a program that rewarded customers for installing off-peak EV charging infrastructure. As a similar smart electrification initiative, commissioners should direct staff to explore rate design options for incentivizing installation of efficient heat pump appliances. Converting from electric resistance to heat pump-based heating would lower bills and free up space on the grid for electrifying gas homes and transportation. Utilities in other parts of the country are adopting special rates to encourage heat pump adoption, and EWEB should explore how such initiatives could be adapted to our region's peak load dynamics. Lastly, regarding the rate design principle of equity, EWEB should look to other public utilities in the region and adjust its fixed charges so that they do not fall as heavily on residential customers and small businesses. Specifically, EWEB should look at creating income-based fixed charges for residential customers. Electrification of gas-heated homes can also play a complementary role here by growing EWEB's residential rate base, helping keep fixed charges for that class low. Look forward to continuing to engage in this process.
Thank you, Mr. Noonan. Next is Micah Anton, followed by Molly Babcock.
Commissioners and General Manager Lawson. My name is Micah. I live in Ward 3. I'm a community organizer and an artist. As a young person living off a low income and living in rental housing, I've been struggling with the rising cost of living here in Eugene. I'm here to ask you to support low-income folks such as myself by implementing a progressive rate design and a percentage of income payment plan. These changes will help ensure that our community can afford to meet our energy needs and invest in a clean energy transition. A progressive rate design could minimize residents' current energy costs and make efficiency improvements more affordable. Raising commercial and industrial costs could support the lower rates for residential homes, while ensuring the largest energy users pay their fair share and encouraging energy efficiency. Here in Eugene, residential homes and small businesses pay a proportionately larger share of base service charges than in other areas with publicly owned utilities, such as Seattle. Adopting a percent of income payment program would reduce this energy burden on our community. Percentage of income payment plans are in place in 10 states and have been shown to be effective in addressing issues surrounding affordability. A percentage of income payment plan would more reliably support low-income households than EWEB's current bill assistance program. In addition to a progressive rate design and a percentage of income payment plan, EWEB should invest in programs to support weatherization and heat pump retrofits in order to ensure the long-term health, efficiency, and affordability. These changes could help low-income households and renters like myself meet our financial needs while investing in a more healthy. I've got a little time, so I'll add that, especially as like one of the youngest people in this room by a large margin, I'm expecting to experience the worsening effects of climate change throughout my lifetime, and the changes that people have mentioned surrounding climate change and environmental protection are super important to me. The comments around community solar, I think community solar would be like a really positive and impactful change for our community. Mostly here to talk about adopting a progressive rate design and a percentage of income payment plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Micah. Next is Molly Babcock, followed by Ellen Gormazano.
Good Board of Commissioners, my name is Molly Babcock, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to provide testimony. Before interning with EWEB Communications Department, I worked in leasing at one of the largest and cheapest student housing complexes in Eugene. My position focused on leasing to first-time renters, many of whom could not afford to live in dorms or luxury options closer to campus. These 17, 18, and 19-year-olds are signing leases for their very first time, many of them unsure of what they're getting into. Strikingly, around half of Eugene is UO students. In addition to leasing, I solved hundreds of resident issues. One of our most common complaints were electricity costs. Costs that would change drastically from month to month, regularly exceeded student budgets, and forced students to choose between tuition, food, and electricity. Even though I worked for the apartment complex, there was nothing I could tell them. And this is just students who don't worry about debt, children, caretaking for relatives, or any of the adult challenges that are exacerbated by high and unpredictable energy costs. Around 25% of US households experience energy burden, meaning they pay 6% or more of their income on energy bills every month. As family budgets get tighter, utilities must act to protect the quality of life of their residents by establishing rate systems that work for resident budgets. I strongly urge EWEB to establish progressive rate design and to ensure large commercial energy users pay their fair share and replace insufficient bill assistance programs with percentage of income. I appreciate the opportunity to get this.
Thank you. And last is Ellen Gormazano.
Well, again, probably your least favorite commentator. Anyway, last month when I came and spoke, I used a few words that were kind of cherry picked out of what I said in the comments afterwards. I was not calling anybody here a Nazi or a Gestapo or anything like that. I was saying that looking at efficiency alone leads us down that road to dictatorship. Why? And instead of just picking on my words, ask yourselves, why are so many people in this community using those words right now? Every time I talk to people about these smart meters being forced on us, that's the response I get from people. It's like, oh my God, Gestapo tactics, extortionists, all sorts of things. It's like, ask yourselves why. It's not just that we're crazy and we like to throw these words around. Look at what your effect is on the community here. And it's taking our money, rates being raised up so we can pay for these projects that we don't want. That's crazy. That's ridiculous. It's painful for us. I'm very low income. It's summertime. I don't use air conditioning. I can't afford my bill right now even. There's all these little padded charges added onto it, service charge, electricity delivery charge, this and that and the other thing. It's like, if I use no electricity, I still can't afford the bill with all those padded charges. So many people in our community are in that same state. And I'm also in a lot of pain today because this morning, one of my friends who was taking people up on power to hang gliders, I'm not sure exactly when it happened, but he had a person with him, went down to the river, came up, hit a power line they didn't see, and his person that was with him drowned. He almost drowned. Today, he was sentenced to a year in prison over that. I'm hoping that our money goes towards putting those orange balls on all of your power lines that cross rivers. I don't know if it was a EWEB line or some other power company's line. But it's really important because people do use the airspace above rivers. They do these things. And my friend that's going to prison is a very beloved person in this community, very beloved. And it's absolutely painful to see this happening. So please, you're using our money, use it on things that we really want, that really benefit us, not things that many of us feel are going to be harmful for our health and well-being. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Provenzano. All right, I will close the public input period and give commissioners an opportunity to comment if choose. Cindy?
I guess, well, thank you everybody for coming out and testifying tonight. I have a question. I know staff will address this, but I do have a question about the EV, what's going on with the chargers. So, I guess I know that this letter went out and maybe I missed it or something, but yeah, I do have a question about that, especially as somebody who, benefits from one of these EV chargers in my home. I think that it is kind of, it's makes having an EV really workable to have your own charger at home. So anyway, I do have questions about that. And then the other thing is for the people who come and testified tonight about rate design. Stick around hopefully for the rest of the later in the meeting, but I appreciate your input for sure about that. And I do have concerns about energy burdens for people and also efficiency and climate change.
Thanks. Others?
Yeah, just really quick. I really appreciate the thoughtful comments this evening, and I also agree that I'm very concerned about folks who experience energy burden, and even with that, I know that we have some of the lowest rates in the country, and we also haven't raised rates much in 5 years. Well, we had 6 out of the last 10 years we didn't raise rates. We actually lowered rates. So, and even with that, I know that this is something that is, with the costs, everything is going up. So it's always something that we have to be mindful of when we're protecting the rates and for people, because it's what we're here to do. That's why we're a public utility. So I just really appreciate the comments, and I apologize for having not gotten back on the EV charger one. I fully agree too that needs to be part of the conversation. Didn't feel like the answers that I got really warranted more. So it's part of what we need to do is to discuss it more, and that's what we're, I think, doing tonight and in the next few months on these rate design conversations, because I fully agree the last person on the line shouldn't be the one that's fully burdened with that charge. It's just, it doesn't make sense. So that doesn't mean it's an easy fix, but I do agree. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out, people. Joe, thank you for your partnership with EWEB over the years. The trust has been very influential in helping protect our watershed, and I think that the partnership is very valuable, and I hope we can continue on. And I agree with trying to do as much as we can on the coast and the Middle Fork as well. We can only spread so thin. How that goes. There's a lot of miles of river that needs protecting, and we'll do our best to do what we can. As far as rate design goes, we're going to have that conversation tonight and over the next several months. It's a very complex discussion, and there's lots of people that are weighing in on it. We got a list of questions that are being put before us as policymakers, and I looked at them and I thought, these are very complex issues. For example, tonight we heard testimony about people saying that large corporate users or large users should pay their fair share. Well, what is fair share? That's one of the questions that we're going to have to answer or help direct. But, you know, yes, large energy users should pay their fair share, but how do we define fair share? These are complicated questions, and I like the input that we're getting from the community on this, and it's going to be a tough conversation going forward because there's so many different community needs and values that will play into this. So I'm looking forward to a robust conversation over the next few months as far as whittling those questions down. Tonight is just the first whack at it because I looked at those questions and I had every one of those questions made me ask 3 questions. And so I think it's going to be a long and fruitful conversation. But thank you for coming and giving us input on it.
Brown?
Thank you all for coming out. I have one comment about it. Mike, thank you very much for coming out. I have grandchildren probably your age, and thank you. And I know you've got a challenging future, but I also encourage you, I appreciate you coming out, telling us because we can't control all of it, but also encourage you to go to the state level too, because right now, you know, in Eastern Oregon, we have these big data centers, AI and everybody else are sucking the life out of all the cheap tier 1 power on. They're getting it for 3 and 4 cents you know, and we're paying 9 and 10, and they're subsidizing that. You know, your elected officials are subsidizing. Look what just Intel happened. We gave billions of dollars of grant. They're laying off 15,000 people. So this isn't a conversation just for us. It's for everybody because we buy our power from those sources where they're giving away all these big, you know, Microsoft and Amazon and everybody has their data centers in Eastern Oregon. They're using all that cheap renewable hydro power, and we're going to run out of power in 2027. We're going to have to figure out. We're going to have to buy it. And so costs are going up. It's a big challenge and everybody wants something. We have to pick and choose what we can do. So applaud your efforts, but keep them up. Keep them on a macro, not just a micro. We'll do what we can. We'll listen to you, but also reach out to people that are making bigger decisions and making subsidies to what I don't personally believe in, giving those big out-of-state corporations all these grants and all the cheap power. So thank you very much for coming out and testifying.
Yeah, so appreciate the comments we heard tonight. I'd like to offer a couple of pieces of information that I think might be useful to those who testified, in particular. Some of the ones around the EV and the EV program in the letter. I think the timing is good for us. We are taking a look at how we approach our EV program, whether that be simple incentives or whether we look at what kind of infrastructure we need to support to be able to facilitate EV adoption. Commissioners, I had planned on meeting with staff over the next several weeks and providing an update to the board and the public, since it's a public forum in October, if that works. There are a number of issues around the infrastructure question, I think, that came up for a number of years. It hasn't been just EVs, but EWEB has imposed the liability of adding load to the system on whoever adds load to the system. And so there is a liability. I don't you remember if the program Let Us Know Before You Grow. That had to do with the influx of marijuana grow operations, which were blowing transformers and other things. So this wasn't necessarily unique to the EV question, but it comes up now because customers are asking for an incentive, a rebate, of which part of that process is to evaluate and let you know that take a look at the system, ask distribution engineering what the status is of the system around you. It hasn't limited the actual payout of the incentive, though. And so all of those kind of wrapped together is what we're taking a look at, and whether there is alternate or different uses potentially of the clean fuels credits that we use to help finance the EV rebate program. And so there'll be more to come on that over the next several weeks. And I'll come back to the board with kind of where we are and what direction we're planning to take with that.
When you come back to the board, I'd like to know, if you have the information, how many people have gotten bills of this nature the last couple of years, if that's available, and so we kind of get a sense of how big. And then if there are areas in town, like how big is that problem? Are there areas in town where we know that it's a particular challenge, or like, most of it is okay, but there's a few areas where it's more energy constrained or capacity constrained?
Yeah, we'll have both of those pieces of information. I do know that we have already looked at how often it occurs. It does not occur very often. But that doesn't mean that someone who is trying to push a different technology might not leverage that to push the technology they want. In particular, a dealer could say, well, this happens. So, but it happens rarely that sort of alternate accompanying investment would be required. But we'll have the data on that. The other thing that we're doing is analyzing where in Eugene, down to the address, EVs are being purchased based on DMV records, so we can actually tell where the hotspots are. In hotspots is probably not the best way to describe it, but where those are being adopted in Eugene, and so we'll have a much more granularity. Part of the rate design discussion will, one of the questions that we teed up, at what point does the individual pay versus at what point does the organization, which is the collective rate base, your neighbors, us in a community in total, pay for? So that will help inform certain programs like this. So I would offer, just as a timing, we'll be looking at this over the next several weeks and plan to come back to the board and the public in October with where we are today and where we would like to take the program going forward. The other one that's relevant, and it has more to do with things such as community solar and the 16 strategies that the city of Eugene put forward. Later this month, we're having a sort of a management climate summit with the city of Eugene. So with Ian in the city, Kelly Hale on our staff, and then management within the city of Eugene and EWEB to talk about those strategies, our climate action plan, where they're at, and what potential opportunities we might have to work together on certain things, or where we don't want to overlap, or where we do want to collaborate. So that'll be coming up. We have that meeting later this month. And that'll take a look at some of the issues. The rest of the things I heard have a lot to do with some of the real basic questions around rate design, and some of those are teed up. I will say that the discussion, just so people here who made comments on it, the discussion today is really to explore the boundaries and the impacts and the situations and the scenarios around rate design. It's not to actually position anything today. There are a lot of things that the board needs to discuss with each other and just kick around the trade-offs that can happen when you start to make changes and adjustments to the thing that is probably most visible to every customer, and that's the rates that they're paying. And so the discussion today is really around exploration, checking the boundaries, understanding where trade-offs might exist and what challenges might exist, so that we can listen and understand what types of information we might want to bring back to the board, our rate design plan, first draft in October. And that'll start to lay out the sequence of things that we want to do over the next probably 3 to 5 years. I'll just preface that with, we're not coming out of the meeting, the discussion later with here's where we're going with rate design. That's what we also don't want to provide judgment as to, Commissioner McCray believes this. That's not necessarily the intent either. It's to push each other and check the boundaries and talk about the what ifs and the trade-offs between them. So.
Smitty.
want to add one last thing, and the gentleman left who gave the testimony about many things he was unhappy with. And one thing that he talked about was the way that we're sitting. And I guess I feel a little bit like I want to explain that because I pushed really hard for us to have a configuration that's somewhat like this. Because when we were in our old space, we used to all sit kind of in a line and we would address the public. And that felt to me a little bit like we were royalty or something above everybody addressing the commoners. And that felt really weird. And also, public testimony is really important, and also so is a lot of other stuff that goes on in this meeting, and a lot of it is back and forth or things that happen amongst us commissioners. And it just feels so much better to be able to see each other when we're having a conversation versus discussing things and we're kind of all in a line. So anyway, I just wanted to state that because I feel like this is kind of like a win for us that we can actually see each other.
Right. With that, I'm going to move on to board action items, starting with consent calendar A.
Move to adopt the calendar A.
Moved by Brown,
Second.
second by Carlson. All in support of adopting consent calendar A, say aye. Aye. Passes unanimously. Consent calendar B.
That calendar B.
Moved by Brown and second by Carlson. Any discussion? None. In support of adopting consent calendar B, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, passes unanimously. Thank you. That was quick. To general business items, City of Eugene liaison update.
President McCray, you're the president. Why don't you start?
All right. Well, Borowski started us off during comments earlier. So John Borowski and Frank and myself sat down with the city manager and the mayor and Councilor Groves. Was that? I think it was it, right? Yeah. Just to discuss areas of mutual interest, especially policy related. We had kind of a wide ranging conversation. I mean, there are a whole bunch of takeaways and I don't want to spend too long rambling on all of them, but I would just say the biggest ones from my perspective were around our water systems and where we're looking at a secondary water source and upgrades to our water storage. And then the other area of primary conversation was around our respective climate programs, electrification, the impacts there, efficiency incentives and the like that the city is considering. And with that, I put to either of you to add anything, items of note that you want to share, John.
Yeah, the only other thing I would put on there, I did mention the work that we did on our fire and emergency planning, that we've done, because the South Hills is an area of concern for our fire mitigation. So we got a memo that forwarded off on what was presented to us last month by Janine, all the stuff that we're doing as far as trying to minimize our risks of fires in our urban interface. So they were happy to hear about that. But yeah, no, I think it was a productive meeting. One of the Commissioner Groves said that he felt it was one of the more productive meetings that he has as a city councilor. He looks forward to that more than any of the other ones that he has. I shouldn't say that, I guess. I'm sure he has many that are very important, but he felt that it was a very valuable meeting and he's going to be phasing out of leadership and he regrets not being able to be in those meetings going forward. So I thought that was a positive takeaway.
Yeah, commissioners, the only thing I would add, the city shared their 2023 update of their climate action plan with us. We've also just been in contact at the staff level, as I mentioned. We're going to meet with the city to talk further about overlap and opportunities and gaps in what each organization is doing. So they shared that. We also discussed a little bit about some of the economic pressures that we are feeling as a utility, which has some uniqueness from the city, we also know that the city has some financial challenges, and ours really being driven by the significant investments that we see in front of us for different reasons, but both on the water side and the electric side over the next 5 to 10 years. Just this, the level of investment needed to continue to deliver our services, drinking water and electricity being a significant driver at a time when the inflationary factors associated with construction and heavy equipment that we tend to deal with is not an opportune time to be in that situation. So we both shared our situations there, and as well as looking at some of the climate activities and wildfire mitigation, which was the other big topic.
You talked about the thought that they wanted to put more on our bill, and I just wanted to find out if there's any updates there, because I want to make sure that it's very clear that I'm not supportive of it unless it's absolutely 100% like they're going to force it on us. And also if they're going to have to go out and find another service for it that's inefficient, and also we need to be able to have some kind of mitigation for those who can't pay it. And I'm guessing if people can't pay the other portion of the bill on the stormwater side, that's the matter. Like it's all, then it gets shut off, they get the notice. So, if there's no mechanism for being able to kind of put that aside, or protecting the low rate payers, the lower income rate payers, that's a concern. So anyway, I'm just curious if there was any discussion on that.
We touched on it briefly, but we didn't go into the level of detail that we had a couple months ago when the city manager was here.
You don't want to use your green button when you talk to turn on your microphone as well. I think some of the people in back were having problems.
Thanks.
Yeah, Frank, please.
Yeah, so Commissioner Carlson, the topic did come up. The city has two pieces of this. Obviously, one is sort of mandated on EWEB related to stormwater and wastewater fees. The other one, which would be a fire fee specifically, in addition to what we are actually required to do under city charter. That is one that I believe they're investigating the costs of different alternatives to that. And so as a community, we won't know until they know, okay, here's option A, here's option B, EWEB, what would be the costs and charges. We do charge them for the billing at cost that we do today, but overall, would that benefit the community? How would the details work relative to partial payments? That, those are details that would have to be worked out.
John?
I just want to quote the idea and plant the seed about regional water supplier. Having been through when EWEB went through providing Bonita with water, knowing that Cottage Grove, Crestwell, Junction City, Coburg, and all the outlying Adelaide communities have big challenges with water supplies. Look at the cost, what it costs for Coburg and Crestwell and things. Knowing that that's not going to be something that we're going to be, if we're reactive or proactive, but if we have that discussion amongst us and also include the city, because it'll be an integral part of that, because we have tons of surplus water. It's a fixed base commodity. You wonder why on the water rate charts, why Medford is way down there, and then we're the second lowest, because Medford's a regional water supplier. We have a commodity that's life-giving that we have surplus of. Surplus water rights. What is it? If we pull water right out of Kenzie, it's no more than 3 or 4% of the flow. And we're going to have a second water source, and we already have the infrastructure going south. And if Junction City needs it or Coburg needs it, are we going to be able to do that? We haven't had that discussion, but I think maybe if we plant that seed with the city, or if this group wants to have that discussion, I think maybe we should think about that, because that's a 5 to 10 year deal. Way beyond my tenure. I think it's something that these smaller communities aren't going to have to think about where they get their water. The groundwater is going down. So just planting that up for the liaison for conversations.
John, Frank?
Yeah, Commissioner Brown, I think that's a really important note on really two fronts. One is we have been approached by some other communities or other communities have expressed some interest in having discussions with EWEB about those types of things. And so it's a relevant topic. The other piece of that is I think that's a very relevant topic when we launch into our new strategic planning, which I won't get too far ahead here, but one of the things that I feel like the existing plan is getting a little long in the tooth, and it's an opportunity for commissioners to take a step back and really look at some of these issues with a fresh set of eyes. And that would be part of looking at what our role and what our business model looks like on the water side. So do we actively pursue that would be part of the strategy.
Thanks. Others? All right, on to our next agenda item, which is rate design directional discussion. Thank you, Deborah and Adam.
Nobody's interested in rate design.
I don't know about that, sir.
You guys can have the microphones. Ready?
Please.
Yeah, President McCray, commissioners, for the record, I'm Frank Lawson. Joining me as part of this discussion, Deborah Hart, Assistant General Manager and Chief Financial Officer, and Adam Rue, who is our rates manager, and has also been a rates manager for an IOU as well. So he has some background in both. This was a disclaimer I was talking a little bit about earlier. I wanted to just recognize that this is really a roundtable discussion for commissioners to have an interactive exploration of the concepts and philosophies that come into play with rate design. It's not specifically around the principles, including we had public comment around the principles. I expect those to evolve pretty significantly over the next number of months and years. But this is an opportunity to tee up some questions that really highlight some of the trade-offs and considerations associated with rate design, and have commissioners talk about their various perspectives and questions associated with those. We're hoping that this is not a grill staff moment for commissioners, although we can provide some insight as to where we are and how things get developed, what other utilities might be doing. But we want to give commissioners the opportunity to explore the boundaries of a really important touch point with customers. Our next plan would be to come back in October with kind of a path proposal. This would be kind of what different elements of rate design we could see evolving over the next number of years as we put together some of the other tools, including a customer system and a financial system, which we'll be launching in December, and then ultimately get to a rate proposal and recommended implementation plan before the end of the year. This is consistent with our organizational goal, which also talks about our cost of service analysis and some of the other aspects of rate design. But this is really an opportunity to kind of zero base and look at this from a holistic perspective and from a commissioner and a customer perspective. Again, this was the principles. They were listed in the background memo. They're more historical based. There is some basis to those. Some of these have been developed. Some of them are intention. Some of them are things that we have worked to implement over the years, but also feel they're a little bit stale and need some refreshing. And in order to do that, we're going to have to understand some of the trade-offs and impacts of rate design itself and the rates that customers pay and why. After tonight, again, we'll come back in October, and we're here really to facilitate this discussion and ultimately developing a path forward and then also an implementation plan, which, as I mentioned earlier, may take a number of years to phase in, depending on which elements of rate design that we're looking at and how we want to make sure that our costs are equitably distributed or distributed with a particular purpose. And that might be part of the discussion that the board has. We've teed up a number of different areas of questions, and I will lean in a bit, President McCray, to you, to how you want to actually manage the discussions around some of these different areas. I categorize these as opposed to just listing 20 questions for the commissioners to pick and choose, although there's really no particular order. There's a lot of things that interact relative to who pays for what investments. We are by statute cost-based in aggregate. And so, but that does not mean that if you look at any particular element or any particular price, that is in itself cost-based. There are, and they exist today, there are cross subsidies that occur even within usage patterns. And I'll give you an example of that, and then I'm going to turn it back to you, President McCray, to pick and choose whichever ones you think create the most lively conversation. But I'll give you an example. Not all of our fixed costs are captured in the variable portion of the rate. On the electric side, there is a fixed charge. It's in the low 20s. That does not cover the fixed charges or the fixed costs that EWEB experiences. Some of the fixed costs are actually captured in the delivery charge and the energy charge, which are based on a kilowatt hour consumption. If you use a low amount of kilowatt hours, you are not paying for your full portion of the fixed costs that EWEB has. If someone is consuming a larger amount of kilowatt hours, you are actually subsidizing those who use very little kilowatt hours. That's in existence today. Now that's something that through the years that keeps the fixed charge low, but there are other utilities locally which have fixed charges 2.5 times EWEBs. And so part of the discussion around rate design is how do you handle fixed versus variable charges? That's a very specific thing. These are, and I just use that to point out that while we're cost-based in aggregate, there are a number of different questions around rate design that would be good to understand the commission's perspective on. And many of those have been laid out here. We will see how far you get. There are a number and hopefully you have some interactive discussions on these. And we would be happy to answer any particular questions that you might have around data or as-is conditions or what other utilities might do. Some of those we may just have to go research if needed. But we're here basically to help facilitate and have you discuss some of these issues.
All right, we'll see what we can do. I would propose, just because you left us with fixed costs versus variable costs, that thank you. Propose that we start there, just because that's where we've just been discussing. One of the questions, is that all right with everybody? Go there. One of the questions I have is, can you remind us of the trade-offs of increasing the fixed cost versus decreasing the fixed cost relatively? Like, my understanding is that increasing the fixed cost overall disincentivizes conservation, right? If people have a high fixed cost, then the amount they use matters less in terms of their overall bill. And so it may not be as conducive to incentivizing conservation. Is that accurate? And then what's, on the other side of the end, what are the trade-offs if we have very low fixed costs?
Well, I think the trade-offs come in as depending on whether you're a low end user or a high end user. What we found with conservation was it's such an after the fact. Doesn't tend to be a real-time interactive issue. And so while we used to have tiered rates and when we looked into it further, it wasn't necessarily a driver of conservation or energy efficiency at the levels we were talking about. In fact, it was almost a disincentive for people who were wanting to convert from a natural gas system to a heat pump, that they were pushed into another tier, and it became a disincentive for them to make that choice. There is also a bit of a misunderstanding that low consumption means low income. Other utilities, Tacoma, for example, EWEB, we've looked at participation in our customer care programs, and consumption is very much consistent kind of across the board. So the distribution of consumption is pretty similar independent of income level. We have, in fact, some low income people live together, they have high bills. And so in aggregate. And so that's not necessarily a trade-off either. There's also, if you're going to make a choice, so if you're going to make a choice that results in lower consumption on your part, so what that essentially does is pushes your fixed costs onto your neighbors. And so that's been one of the challenges, and I see Jim in the back of the room who's advocated for some of the issues related to solar and building up solar credits in the summer, paying your bill off in the winter, and why do we have this monthly true up? Some of it is because when you lower your consumption, what you're doing is your fixed costs are shifted to somebody else. And when that happens, basically your neighbors are paying for your system. And rate design is actually a barrier to that. So it kind of comes back to some of these other questions. So I don't know that I would encourage commissioners to just talk fixed versus variable. I think some of the issues around who pays is part of this, behavioral versus actual cost. I think those are probably more relevant discussions. This is was just an example.
Yeah. Okay. Just a clarifying question. So our fixed rate's around 20, Lane Electric's 42, Latcher Lane's like 50. I don't know what sub is, but they're rural. They don't have generation. Conceptually, I would think that ours should be much, much higher than theirs because we have generation and all of those things. So I know it's been a conscious decision of ours to keep our fixed rate low because when we tried to raise it, we had quite a bit of pushback back when we had tiered rates and things such as that. But have you done any research on why? I mean, they've raised their fixed rates. All those other utilities have every year. And like you said, they're 2.5 times ours. Can you try and rationalize why that is?
I think it's philosophical. Their fixed cost would likely in some ways be higher because of the line miles per customer. So they're more spread out. Our generation costs tend to be, there's a certain fixed amount in that, but I think those are tend to be amortized over kilowatt hours. And so those really become energy charges as opposed to fixed costs. So that itself wouldn't drive that difference. But I think they may, but I think also philosophically, we have chosen not to do that. And I think in the long term, when we look at how we want to distribute costs relative to customer choices, that will be one of the areas that we have to look at. That'll be driven by some of these other questions. It's not so much the end question. I think that's a result of some of these other questions. It's not the where we would start. But I don't think it's necessarily because we have a lower fixed cost or we have a higher fixed cost because of generation. That's.
Mindy?
I know that you want some answers from us, but I have 3 questions for you, actually. I guess, so my first question is, what is most typical? So there's a lot of different utilities do a lot of different things. So what is the most typical, I would say, in this region? Second one is in places communities that are considered more progressive, or more in line with, say, our values? What is their rate design and how is that received by the community there? And then thirdly, like, we're supposed to answer these individual questions, but like, how do we design, what is the best way to design a rate that encourages conservation, doesn't hurt renters who have no choice in kind of energy efficiency, and also influences everyone to invest in energy efficiency, including landlords? You know, that's a tall order, and maybe we can type it into some generative AI thing, it'll come up with an answer. But for me, like, if you were to optimize that, what's best?
I'll start and Adam can weigh in as well, Deborah. First of all, if you ask AI, it would be one of these data farms that would be consuming a lot of energy, and I don't know if we want to go there. I think there's a couple of, so we do live in a region, if you look at the West Coast, where there are extreme views of rate design, and I'll give you two examples that I know you're very familiar with. On one side, you have SMUD, Sacramento Municipal Utility District, and you were aware of some of their programs. I use the term here in this very first question of socialize for a reason. They have very high rates and they socialize a lot of things across their customer base. So they rate base a lot of, they have very robust, significant programs that they then distribute across their utility. They also have rates designed to facilitate certain behavior. For example, their on-peak versus off-peak rate is significantly different. It's probably not driven by cost today. It is driven by the direction they see the future costs going. On the other hand, there's SMUD and then there's SUB. And SUB, you see very much the approach that our approach to limited income, our approach to anything related to costs and rates is to keep all our rates low and be as simple and most economically as we can. Now, there's a number of different utilities in between. Seattle is much different than Tacoma in some ways. Also, there's Snohomish, which is a large utility up there. There's also some IOUs. And so there are a lot of different programs. I think that's why some of these questions are important for us, because right now there's a pretty wide bookend. And none of the things that we talk about are free. It's a matter of who's paying the bill. And we're seeing that it's really important, depending on where you want to go as an organization, how you design the rates that answer that question. So kind of answered your question, but it's a pretty broad spectrum. And you see a lot of different examples of it.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add, I guess, to the what would be kind of one starting point for what's the ideal solution, I guess from my perspective would be from like that purely rates analyst approach, we look at just aligning our prices that we charge customers to our costs. And we could get very in the weeds and say like, okay, this is like our capacity costs, where we have capacity in these specific hours. We're billed on Bonneville transmission once a month on Bonneville's transmission system peak. And we design our distribution system on one basis. It's going to be, different design criteria. So each one of those is going to like pick different hours. And we could have the most like in the weeds, customer specific, hour specific. That would be kind of like the most optimal, because then everyone's going to do things that aren't impacting anyone else. And they're getting those, ideal price signals for solar and conservation and stuff. But at some point, we just have to do something that's manageable and like average all of those some way. So that's kind of where the trade-offs and the values and strategy weighs in. So I guess it's kind of like, what do we average and to fit those at the reasonable buckets.
And Commissioner, I would add that, we share a lot of the things that you hear, whether it's Danny or Jim or Micah or whoever, we share a lot of those issues and concerns. But the example he points out is one. And I would say there's not consensus within staff on a lot of these issues either. These are complex. And I'll give you the one, number 5, driving behavior, present versus future costs. If you just look at what Adam mentioned about capacity, right now, if we were to charge a different level of capacity versus a peak and off-peak capacity charge, it's not significant enough in a difference today to drive behavior. But we look at the future, and Brian Booth is going to tell us capacity in the future is going to be worth a different amount than it is today. And if we're setting ourselves up, we're going to look at this and say, future capacity is going to be worth something. And we want to drive the behavior that helps all of us as a community to maximize the resources that we have. That's the difference between what Adam just said, which we appreciate the analyst driving into the detail today saying this is what we want, which is true, but it's a conscious choice to then say this is where we think it's going, and that may be a future cost driving behavior approach versus a where we are today cost. But supporting what Adam said is we do have to understand in detail where we are today, which is the purpose for refining our cost of service analysis and some of the things that Adam is working on.
And I want to say I strongly support that rate should be geared to drive the behavior that we want to see in the future, because I think behavior we want to see is to use less energy, use less electricity, and no matter what happens in the future, it's always going to be beneficial for us to use less electricity. And I think it takes a while to build habits in people. And so even though we might not need to do it right now, I think it's important.
Thank you for answering our first question here. We got an answer. I think it's also the future. The future from a cost perspective is not just dollars, but if you start to look at things like cost of carbon, there's I know there was a question in the testimony about what's smart electrification. Smart electrification is also using less electricity, which is the most carbon-free resource of all, but using it at a time when the most carbon-free resources are available. So there's the combination of those two, and driving behavior takes a while.
So I agree with Mindy about time of use. And some of you, I don't know if you all participated, but a long time ago, EWEB gave us these little feeders to put in our houses. And we get to use for behavior modification to see if we could adjust our living patterns, I guess is for lack of a better term, on using less electricity. And it's not that hard to do. You just program things to come on at night and do that, and you can actually save money. But you're right, the financial incentive right now, I did it. I won a big bet with Commissioner Mattal about it, who would win, and I did. But that's an aside. But behavior modification through tiered rate, and not to time of use, I think is very important, because it's not only going to be the cost, it's going to be the availability. And if it costs 10 times more than it does now, if we don't have it, we're going to have the brownouts. And so I'm all for that. And I'm also, if there's a way that we can incentivize the big heavy users to cut down during peak times, and give them a fixed rate, because I know we have contracts with some of the big users now and they'll power down. I think they did it voluntarily last summer, but to do that as well should be there. And then I'd like to, I don't know how we would do the income base. I know that's not up there right now, but at some point here, I want to see that, because that's so complex that I'd really have to understand that better. How would we, the verification, who would do the verification, and such as that.
Can we come back to income? Do you mind?
Please, yeah.
But I also, what you said, Commissioner Brown, is something that I would like to kind of get the broad perspective from the group. You said incentivizing behavior, and I just want to throw something out. Let's say that even a large user, use the large user example. A large user changes a pattern of their consumption that is beneficial. And so there is some kind of an economic and or climate and or both benefit to that. Who should get that benefit? Should that, because of their behavior, should that go to incentivize their behavior because there's a benefit to all of us? Or should some or all of that, so should it go to the person or the organization making that decision, or should some of that be shared amongst our community at large? And to what degree? Because not everybody has the same opportunity to shed load. And we'll come back to the question around income, but it relates to other customers as well. But should the participant gain the incentive or the benefit, or should part of that be shared with the community?
Well, I think participant should be, because there's a big user that's one of our top 10 within, quarter mile here right now. If they change their hours of operation and shut down at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, so they weren't sucking so much electricity out of the system during peak, that would make a lot more affordable electricity available for everybody. So everybody's benefiting indirectly, in my opinion, but it may cost them extra to do that, to shift their hours of operation. So they don't do that. Same thing with firing up the University of Oregon, or Lane County Courthouse or anything else, just change hours of operation just in government alone. And, shut those buildings down earlier or do things like that. But if it costs them more, I think to me, the entire consumer benefits because it makes more affordable electricity available to us rather than the expensive renewable stuff during peak. Or the
How do you answer the question that someone goes, well, you're getting your EWEB's, rewarding you for that behavior, but I can't do that because I don't have that same opportunity. Your response, it sounds like, is that there is a benefit. There's an efficiency benefit gained from that generally keeps rates low. And that's the ancillary benefit to you. I'm using you as the example.
I get that argument, but to me, the individual consumer will also have that opportunity, not on the same scale, but time of use. If it's good for one, it's good for all. And if you're telling me that you're going to charge me 10 cents a kilowatt to use power during non-peak times, but you can charge me 20 cents during peak. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to put timers on everything, and I'm going to, turn off my hot water heater at certain times, and run the dishwasher at midnight. Things such as that. Behavior modifications. Same thing with the big users, and everybody will benefit from it, just directly from a rate, but also availability. Because if we all don't change our behavior, you guys are going to have to go out and buy very, very expensive power, and that's going to cost us all because the rates are going to go up all over.
So I heard 2 votes for rates that drive behavior. Right. And then specifically around thinking about future impacts and future costs, which is one of the questions here. I guess I would just add my vote for that I think we can and should use our rates to drive behavior in the way that Mindy and John just suggested, at least that we're thinking about using that as a tool, and that we should be, to the extent that we're really confident in what the future costs are going to be, that we should be driving towards a future with lower overall costs for all of us. So anything that can help us avoid, additional generation costs or transmission or whatever those other costs are. I think I share the perspective there. Sonia?
Yeah, a few thoughts. I also agree. I mean, I think any rate that you have, it can't be both. It can't be all on one side or all on the other. Think about societies in general. You need to think about self and the benefit that you get, and you also need to think about the community. If you have all on one side, all on one side or the other, it just doesn't function. So to the extent that we can incentivize the individual and also capture some of the good for the general public, that helps offset some of those costs. The on socializing across all rates, I mean, it's challenging, right? Because we're set with picking winners and losers. No matter how you play it, we're picking winners and losers. There's somebody that has to pay. And so I think why we have gone towards what I think is incorrectly called equity in here, or we try to match to the best extent possible. If you incur the cost or cause cost to the system, you pay that rate or that, that benefit. And I think it's probably better to call it equality in some respects, because our rates are not changed depending on what your needs are and the outcome that we want to achieve. We give a payback to those who need it. So that's a little bit different for me. But I definitely want to recognize and understand in our rates. I mean, we want to be able to protect the people, but we also need to charge people. And so somebody has to pay, and businesses struggle too. So how do you pick who gets the charge and who doesn't? One thing that came to me in some of the conversations you had was around designing. So most of the charge of a home or a business is set up right from the very beginning in the design phase. So once you build that home and you install equipment in it, that drives the amount that you're going to use. I wonder if there's some, in the interest of incentivizing the behavior we want to see in the future, if we could do something around charging higher rates, maybe system development charges or something to that effect, for installs that are not as efficient as we want them to be in the future. I don't know if anybody has interest in that, but I mean, we really need to think very critically and be bold about how we're going to drive it in the future. And I just think it's very challenging to both protect the lowest income people and also, recognize that businesses have opportunities to go elsewhere. We're not a large San Francisco type community. Like, those businesses can say, okay, well, it's too expensive for me to do business here. I'll just up and leave. So sending all the burden onto them also doesn't help low income people here, because then there's no jobs. So we have to have a balance that has support for all of those groups. Again, it can't just be only one group or only another. We have to come together with all of those different groups to find something that's reasonable. And so to the extent we can, whatever process this looks like, I hope that we include low-income people and businesses, and because they're going to have to be a part of the buy-in. And everybody's going to have to recognize that there is no perfect solution that we're going to pick that's going to fix everything and get us to the solution in the future. Like, everybody's going to have to give a little bit, maybe a lot, in order to get the rate design that we need to put us in a better situation in the future. The last thing that I wanted to talk about was, we've looked at the rates for individuals that do put power on their own homes, solar and whatnot. That is a huge cost. They're essentially subsidizing their own system. I know that the payback on them that we've looked at is not great, but I also recognize that our climate is it's changing in very different ways, and we're seeing some of the impacts that we thought we would see 20 and 30 years from now today. And I do want to look at solar and more localized generation again. So as we look at what rates we're incentivizing for homes, I would like to see. I would like to have some more robust discussion.
Okay.
So one comment, Commissioner Carlson. We do plan to use kind of a similar process that we're using with our integrated resource planning studies, where we're using a community table to bounce different ideas off of, and the community table is really well represented of people across the community. So we'll do something similar as we get into the implementation part of rate design. I do think that your observation around equity as it stands today, the difference between equity and equality is probably, where we're looking at present rates that do not arbitrarily discriminate within a class. That is more aligned with the definition of equal as opposed to equitable, which tends to be outcome based. So that's a good observation as to where we stand today. The solar piece, I think, is one where we're going to have to look at where does the cost align with what we're trying to do, not only in our integrated resource plan, but customers' participation in that. The reason that the payback right now is very challenging in Eugene is that the rates that people are displacing are pretty low. If we had 30-cent power, and I've actually had someone in the community suggest we raise our rates just to get people to generate their own electricity, which is a philosophy. Not everybody would agree with that philosophy, but the rates that we're displacing are pretty low compared to the installation cost. And also just the amount of annual output versus some other places. You just look at that and you compare that, even taking all the incentives into account, the payback period is very long. And so that doesn't even account for the fact that what you're displacing, there's a fixed cost component that would still be there. And so there's some challenges, but it sounds like from your perspective, it's something that from a resource planning perspective, and how does that weigh into rate design? It's a consideration for sure that we should be looking at.
One other thing too is we look at kind of unique scenarios and situations. I know a number of years ago we looked at how we were implementing our low income program, and we had a lot of overhead costs because it was very creative and it had all these different things that we did, but ultimately it was the admin cost of it was so creative that it was not, we weren't getting enough money to the people. And so whatever we do in this system, I prefer more simplicity, because the best we can do for our public is to keep the rates down. I mean, if we really care about low income rates, that keeping it more simple and keeping it affordable for businesses and community members, because that incentivizes people to switch from natural gas and to get these other more efficient systems that drive around climate change. I would prefer that than the alternative of let's raise rates, because then it becomes a disincentive to switch. We have very clean power, and whatever we do in our energy portfolio, I would like to keep that way and continue to incentivize people to do the switch. And so that's why some of these concerns or some of these issues where we're talking about, burdening that last person who gets onto the system with that huge rate is less appealing to me, because we want more people to use clean energy. That's what we provide.
So for me, some of the points that I would like to push forward, as far as peak, non-peak, I think that's a good conversation to have. I think what I would like to see is if the incentivizing of it can be a lower rate if you slip to off-peak rather than a higher rate to the person who can't go off-peak, right? So if my restaurant, if the power that we're buying at 2 in the morning is cheaper, and we can use that lower rate to incentivize that person to turn on their dryer at 2 in the morning, I'm all for that. But I don't want to charge me 20 cents a kilowatt hour to cook dinner for you guys, so that you can charge 10 cents an hour at 2 in the morning for somebody to dry their clothes. If
Commissioner, what if you're using power when it is 20 cents?
Then charge me the 20 cents. And if you can push it off and it's 10 cents at midnight, that's fine. Charge me what it costs, but don't charge me more to subsidize the person who's off peaking. That's what I was leading to.
This is where one of the tensions comes in, because today's cost versus the behavior that I've heard in the future is different.
Right.
So this is one of the tension. This is the wrestling match that occurs. Is right now it might not be 20 cents versus 10 cents, or maybe it is 20 cents versus 10 cents, but it's going to take more than that to incentivize the kind of behavior that gets people off peak to a more advantageous time. So that's that is that's the thing we'll have to wrestle through.
And maybe that, then, okay, and yeah, wrestle through that, but that's what. So outcomes that I would like to see are, one, we heard people tonight talking about moving to an income-based rather than the way we do it now as a form of subsidy. Looking at that and figuring out what's the best way, like Sonia said, what's the best way to incentivize and help out our low-income customers, right? Whether that's switching a model and looking at other models that other utilities use, or using the model that we have and expanding it or tweaking it or whatever. But figuring out some way that within our rates that we can afford to help the low-income people. The other thing that I would like to see us subsidize towards is helping to weatherize, and this is something that I said when I got on the board, helping to weatherize and incentivizing the rental stock to move to more efficient types of uses for heating and cooling. Just because that helps the system as a whole. If we are going to be using subsidies and we can figure out a way to do that, I'm all for that. The way that we do that, I'm not sure, but if that's system wide, we say, okay, there's going to be this much and that we're going to use that money to incentivize, which helps us lower our, like you said, the cleanest kilowatt is the one that's not having to be used. And so if we can do that by sharing the cost all the way across the whole customer base to a small percentage, that's something that I would be interested in pursuing if that's possible. Because of right now, there really is no incentive for a landlord to put in a heat pump, to weatherize a house, because they're not paying bills. And so, and that's been a quandary that we've had for years, is how do you do that? And where is the money to do that? So if there is a way to get to that, that would be something that I would be interested in pursuing. I don't know the rest of the commissioners. And well, go ahead.
Yeah, Commissioner, I did sort of want to touch on this should who and what matter question. And this does, should the customer specific profile or the consumption purpose matter? So an example of that you brought up, should we charge a different rate based on your income? It's not based on the service we're providing, it's based on income. Or should we charge a restaurant a different amount from a hospital or a brewery? Or should who you are and what you use the electricity for, should that matter to us? Or should we focus on the price for the service provided? That's a fundamental question that I think warrants answering.
For me, no. For me, an electron costs so much, and if I'm buying that electron, it doesn't know if I'm John Borowski or if I'm John Brown or if I'm Elon Musk, and it should. That's my opinion. I don't think it should. It should be based on that. I think that we can do it on amount of usage as opposed to amount of income or specific industry. I don't like that way, but that's just me.
Okay, well, that's a fundamental question.
Yeah, and that's where I land on it.
Mindy, and then I'm gonna take a shot.
I'm really curious if you're gonna be able to take anything away from this, because what I'm hearing is that we want it all, basically.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, when I try to dig into your questions, I think what it comes down to is, do you want a socialized system or do you want more of a capitalism based, right? Like how much do you want to subsidize everybody for individual customer choices? And I feel like that's what you're getting to in a lot of these questions. And for me personally, I land on the side of more socialized costs because I think that even if John puts in a heat pump in his house and that's gonna lower his bills and use less electricity, that ultimately benefits me because I think it benefits society as a whole. I think that's, a lot of people wouldn't agree with that. I don't know how to do it with the like income equality or income equity piece, but I think like we have to keep our eye on the prize, and our eye on the prize is to use less electricity and to make sure that we use as much carbon-free electricity as possible. So however we get there, I don't know if that's using a more socialized process or not, but that's kind of how me, I want to focus on how do we get to that end goal the easiest. But personally, I lean towards a more socialized system. But I would be willing to give some of that up if it gets us the behavior, and the patterns and the costs that we need.
So just, I think that's I appreciate, Mindy, you've answered 2 questions, which is great. I think it's important to understand that perspective. And I think that's something that as the CEO of the organization, understanding that perspective from the rest of the board is going to be helpful. Because lots of the programs that we're talking about, and we share the interest of a lot of the people that, again, those are not free. There are various degrees of return on investment with those, but they aren't free. And so what I'm hearing you say is if we want to apply our values to a community, that you tend to lean toward, let's absorb those in the utility rates to do things that is of value to the community. And that's kind of what I'm hearing. Wow, that's woke me up. There are a few things that we socialize now, which is, for example, the school grants. This board approves in the budget the fact that we give money to 4J and the other school districts around to do things that we think are of interest and aligned with the organization.
And I'm going to quickly, I know you're waiting, Matt, but quickly answer your other question about does customer specific profile matter? I'm a little hesitant on that one because, again, my leaning towards the socialized system and the greater good, I do feel that there might be some businesses or institutions that serve the broader community, but I would hate to impose individual values on that because I think that while somebody might value a senior center more than a restaurant, somebody else might value a restaurant more than something else, right? I mean, so
He values both.
I'm not saying I value either of those more, but I think that you have to be really careful there. But I would say that if there was some kind of community amenity or something that really broadly served the entire community, I could see having a different rate for that, but it would have to be some kind of extraordinary circumstance.
Commissioner McCray, I would love to hear perspectives from the rest of the board on sort of Mindy's view of sort of this. It's a spectrum between sub and SMUD, and it's not discrete. There is a spectrum here between the more socialized utility and the sub. So, you know, it sounds like Commissioner Schlossberg, you're a little bit more toward the socializing of things.
So I just want to check the time. I think we have till 7:35, right, on the agenda. Just want to make sure that we were a little ahead with our other items. So if it's okay with you all, I hope we can use this time and continue to use that extras for the rest of this conversation. So we have about 20 minutes left. So probably answering as many questions as we can for Frank and team would be useful, including that question, which I think overall I would aim towards the SMUD side of things personally, largely because I feel like anything where we're just trying to make the system as efficient as possible for today, it makes it hard for us to anticipate and prepare for the curveballs that are coming. And so to the extent, I mean, I think we're a really sophisticated utility that understands the curveballs that are in front of us. And I think we should use every advantage to try and anticipate and prepare ourselves for those curveballs. You had one question about the sharing of benefit for time of use rates. And I think from my perspective, at least 50% of the benefit of that should go to the customer, maybe more than that. It does feel like some amount of that benefit should go to the utility as a whole. Because I think there's benefit there that we can add on to provide incentives to, you know, further enable more people to use time of use pricing to their benefit. Quick question for you about rates versus incentives. Most of our conversation here is about rates, but I hear us sometimes talking about incentives for high efficiency appliances, for example. But that's not really what we're talking about today, right? We're really talking about the rates piece. How do we tease that apart?
Well, the two are related in the sense that a rate can be a mechanism for an incentive, either behavior wise or otherwise. And also the more incentives you have, it affects your rates, your revenue requirement, which is part of kind of the philosophy part of rates is, you know, I'll say that SMUD, you know, their rates are significantly higher just in general, because they do a lot of the things that they feel the community wants. So there are trade-offs there, including incentives. So it's not necessarily lost revenue to the community, but it flows through the utility and then back. There's a revenue recycling piece there that is part of that. But what people often see is they see the rate, and that's what you hear feedback on in many cases, not necessarily just the incentive. So they are related, although you can approach them slightly differently in how you do the mechanics of them.
And we've had conversations here at this board about talking about rates versus bills, which kind of gets to that, right? Mm-hmm. And from my perspective, to the extent that we can use rates to shift behavior, but then also at the same time provide incentives to enable people to use less electricity so that their bills remain affordable, right? And especially when we're thinking about high efficiency, you know, heating and cooling, for example, it just feels like there's yes, it costs us more collectively, but if we can, especially for lower income households, enable people to install high efficiency appliances, I think there's a huge benefit not only to the individual, but societally. Along those lines, I know, and we've talked about this too, we have really good programs for weatherizing and insulating low income households, including rental households. And for replacing heating systems in rental households, low-income households. I feel like in addition to paying attention to our rates, there's a huge opportunity to take those programs and turn them up. And by that, I don't mean put more money there. I mean just do a more aggressive campaign to advertise those programs to help people access those programs. I've used the water heat. I purchased a heat pump water heater, hybrid water heater several years ago, which is amazing. Like it's just a crazy contraption that does amazing things, but it was kind of hard to navigate. Took me to another website, took us from our EWEB website to another website that you're like, is that actually EWEB? It's kind of awkward. And I think there are some ways in which we can make the programs we have right now that would enable people to access more efficiency programs, make it easier for people. And along with that, we have huge federal subsidies that we've talked about. So I think to the extent that we can, you know, not even necessarily, well, yes, touch the rates, work with our rates, but also, you know, dial in our programs to make them as effective as possible to get those incentives in the pockets of our customers so that we're all moving towards lower consumption overall. I think there's huge benefit individually and across the utility and societally. And then I know Brown has another round, and then Sonia, I'll come to you.
I just, you know, I know we do things for a reason. And I'm assuming there's either something fundamentally wrong with what we're doing now, or something that a drastic change in behavior or something in the future, and that's why we're doing this. I haven't heard that yet, but I from you, but I'm sure that you can answer that question. Because having been through this board when we did have tiered rates and how long it took us to go from tiered rates back to a flat rate, but we still have tier rates with water. And just about, but we had a reason we did that, and I haven't heard that reason why we're doing this. I'm not trying to throw water on the fire. I'm just trying to understand the motivation behind this. Is this because anticipated change? Or is this because we have a flaw in the system and we're trying to correct it?
There are no, what's the robot movie? There are no ghosts in the machine here, Commissioner. What we're really trying to, and I think this is one area where the strategic plan is right on. And that's a recognition that the dynamics that are being created around scarcity in the system is going to require us to behave differently and our customers to behave differently. The pricing mechanisms that we use to really align the use of the services that we provide. And today it's electricity, and at some point it's going to be water is going to be scarce as well. If you look at other areas of the country, how we manage that scarcity, pricing is a piece of that. And so having to look at time of use, having to look at things that will drive consumption a certain way that's most beneficial is the reason that we're exploring this now. It's one of the pieces that is going to be necessary in the future. We haven't done anything wrong. We've recaptured our prices. There are certain sensitivities that I think we are a little bit vulnerable to in not capturing all our fixed costs with more of a fixed base charge. We missed opportunity. We will at some point have the tools necessary to be able to manage these dynamics. That's the difference going forward.
So that helps me immensely, because if there's not an incentive for reducing consumption, because if you have a lower rate because of a particular position you have in society, then we've not accomplished our goal. And so I think we have to have something that invokes not only incentivization based upon your capacity to pay, but also your capacity to use less consumption, because it's a scarcity issue that we're trying to address.
Yeah, it's really optimizing, and the challenge that we have today and is that right now the marginal cost difference between 1,399 kilowatt hours and 1,400 kilowatt hours is pretty minimal, and right up to the point where you get a massive charge. So your marginal costs are really small up to the point where you have these huge investments to make in new facilities, in new infrastructure. I mean, we're talking about, we were talking about earlier about areas of the city that might be vulnerable to capacity. One answer to build capacity is to manage your peaks, manage your loads, because your system is designed for peak capacity. We can't design it to deliver electricity 90% of the time. We have to do it 100% of the time. And so one of the mechanisms, one of the important mechanisms that everybody sees, all of our customers, is their bill. And if their bill drives behavior that helps manage that, that's what we need to explore.
So to answer the question that you posed specifically around the socialized cost, I think I kind of touched on it, but maybe that wasn't as clear. So I'm more supportive of socializing some of the costs for residential specifically so we can take care of low income people. People are the underlying piece there. They need to survive. When we talk about the business side of it, I'm less inclined to have socialized costs or pick and choose this group over that group, because I think, you know, to your point too, it's just, it gets way too messy. We all have different values. Who does what when? That's not something that we can dabble into. So I have zero interest in that side of it. But I also recognize the dichotomy between the SMUD and having this pie, the piece of pie the pie that needs to be paid for so that we can have those benefits, versus maybe the smaller one where we have like the subtypes where you just have less to pay overall. That is, again, for me, I tend more towards the simple side of it, given our size. We're, you know, what, 4 times the size of sub, roughly, maybe 3 times, but we're nowhere near what SMUDS is. We still have the ability to incentivize change. And so for me, in whatever way that we can design rates that specifically gets at the underlying infrastructure, maybe we can, I don't know if it's possible. I know that our mechanism is when we charge people using the electricity, but the home has the connection. Could we charge the owner of homes a different rate if they are either a rate or some fixed fee? Because we are now giving their renter a $280 credit because they have not put in the correct infrastructure. And so their renter is just blowing hot air out the windows. I don't know if that's possible, but I would look into more creative ways that get it connecting those two pieces.
I'm worried about the SMUD model because of the implication that has as the cost. The rate, you know, if we go the high socialized method, it gets away from, in my view, it gets away from affordability. Because somebody's got, you know, to pay for all the programs, you spread it over everybody, but then everybody's bills go up. And what effect does that have? Are you really, or do you go the smaller piece of pie, like Sonia said? So I think that our community can tolerate a certain amount of socialization and incentivizing and using that. But I don't think that our community can go the 16-inch pizza. You know, I think we can figure out what size that is. And I think that that's something that the community has been accustomed to us doing, and figuring out where and how is the best way to do that by also trying to keep the rates as low as we can is something that I'm on socialized light as my default. Because I mean, we're talking about a huge increase next year, and then one's going further, and we have no idea what the Bonneville contract is going to cost us. And then if we pile on all these other things to try and incentivize it, we won't need to do it. The rates will be so dang high that people will flock to demand management because that's what's going to happen. It's like what they said, when gasoline gets so high, they said when gasoline hits $6 a gallon, that's when it's going to be best to have electric cars. And we're at $4 a gallon, and you're seeing a lot more electric cars. I'm at socialized light.
Not the 16-inch pizza.
Not the giant. I can go with the medium.
I will point out that while rate design, and I think the pizza model has started to come into play here. The pizza, there's some toppings on the pizza that are related to this.
Yeah, exactly.
But the pizza is going to grow anyway because of the costs that we're seeing on the supply side and in the infrastructure side. The pizza is going to become more expensive overall.
Unless you take toppings.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, I guess so. But in general, rate design is about how you're allocating costs, what kind of behaviors you might want to drive. But there is still a revenue requirement that we're dealing with overall. Now that can grow under heavy socialization versus light socialization. And that's something that, that we have a light version now to consider. And the way I read that, Commissioner, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we need to be very intentional with that and surgical. If there's things we want to do, and Commissioner Schlossberg really focused on rentals and low income, then that's a piece of it. And maybe that means other things don't happen. But it's more, you're saying more surgical and calculated and intentional with that. I've sort of interpreted.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, I'll just take a moment to make a couple more comments. I think the idea of an income-based rate that was proposed tonight, I think is an interesting thing for us to chew on. I personally would be interested in further conversation about how we deal with low-income customers, how we support low-income customers in particular. We've had a few conversations around the table about that over the last few years, but we haven't really zeroed in on, at least that I can tell, really significantly shifting our programs. And my understanding is that most of our assistance, it's oversubscribed at this point, and I would anticipate, especially with a rate hike, that we're going to see more of that. So from my perspective, I'm very supportive of us ensuring that low-income customers are not buried by high electricity costs. So I'd be interested in speaking, have more conversation about that. And at the other side, I'd be interested in conversations about our really large customers and how we're charging them and how much of the collective water they're carrying. That's probably mixing metaphors. How much of the burden of paying for our whole system is carried by our larger customers, and whether they're carrying the appropriate amount, or if there's ways that we might incentivize or disincentivize their investments as well. So to me, the very larger customers and our low income customers are the places where I'd like to have more conversation.
Commissioner McCray, I will make a couple quick comments. One is, overall, our system's not necessarily overprescribed. It may have peaks and valleys certain times of the year.
No, I mean,
sorry,
the subsidies for low income customers, they're oversubscribed. That's what I was.
Right, I don't think they are.
Okay.
But
okay.
And the way those were designed was, we looked at this, we call it a utility burden because we include water, but equivalent, basically comparing income levels with typical bills. And there is a certain percentage of the population that falls within a utility burden category. And we allocate enough budget to be able to shift those people from burden to unburdened. That's the basis of our revenue requirement at this point. Not necessarily how we distribute it, but that's how the revenue requirement is based. The other thing that you mentioned was, I was going to comment on, large customers. I would say that because large customers are large customers, we do probably a more specific cost of service analysis with them than we do with just sort of a general class of customers. We do the class, but when we look at large customers, we actually analyze and allocates costs very specifically to them. And I feel pretty comfortable that when someone says pay their fair share, they're paying their fair share of the cost because of the analysis. That now, some of that shifts a little bit over time with the larger, a longer or shorter contract, but they are scrutinized pretty well when it comes to really looking at the cost that they're incurring versus what we're charging.
Helpful, thank you. Others, last comments?
Well, this was helpful. I know that we don't walk away with a specific action item, but it really was helpful. We didn't even get to the second set of questions, which is something that maybe you can think about. When you think about upriver rates, there's a cost difference that we've talked about. And so anyway, these were more design related questions. Does level of service matter was another one. Let's say you live in, the downtown network has to some degree, a higher degree of reliability. They also have higher fixed costs associated with their connectivity to it. Should someone downtown pay a higher rate because it's more reliable? Should someone who lives in an underground service territory pay more than someone who lives in an overhead service territory based on level of service? Those are other considerations. Don't expect the answers for that one this evening, but there's lots of questions associated with rate design.
Really, this discussion was really helpful for me. Again, I'm not sure what you're going to take away because we want everything, but it's really helpful for me to just have a conversation about it and to hear the questions that everybody else asks. And I know on our calendar, we have a work session in a couple weeks that I think is not happening,
Right.
but I would just encourage more of this kind of discussion as we talk about rate design and even the questions that we haven't answered. It just helps me think things through to have a kind of open-ended question, but really to hear what others say as well. So I don't know if next time that we talk about this or if there's another opportunity to maybe address those other questions.
There will be a number of other opportunities to do that, Commissioner. This is a really, I mean, we've had it in the strategic plan as part of this period of time, this number of years. I don't feel like it's a one and done kind of issue. It's something that impacts every single customer as well as people who aren't customers who are in our community. And it's something that we're going to have to understand the trade-offs in order to be able to set a path forward. So I don't know if we'll get to an actual how the plan will come together at the end of the year. It may be that we're starting to do 2 or 3 building blocks with a general concept in mind, or it might be more well laid out. We'll see how far we get, but it's I think we agree that's not a one and done. So more discussions like this.
Thanks. And we have.
Yes, thank you.
We have one more item before we take a break. So the customer service policy on power purchase rate schedule.
Follow that one.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'm going to do my standing thing because I'm the last presentation between here and the bathroom break. I try to keep the energy level pretty high as we talk about something as enthusiastically named as customer service policy power purchase rate schedule. So with that, let's jump into it. I'm Brian Booth, Chief Energy Resource Officer here at EWEB. Cohort in this effort were Rod and Deborah, our AGMs, along with Adam Rue, our rates manager. Let's get into the overview. EWEB has been approached by a number of large customers who are interested in building solar generation, relatively large solar generation on their new and existing facilities. Our current policy, we offer net metering for facilities up to 25 kW. And for projects greater than 25 kW and less than 200, we offer a direct generation rate. That is, the generator can connect directly to our system and we pay them a generation-based price for that. This is typically, I said that second bullet, but for the bottom one, for customers with large sprawling campuses, the cost of directly connecting to that system can be quite large. You can imagine University of Oregon, they want to put in a solar array at the back end of the campus. We say it has to be on its own service drop, so you get to trench in a mile of primary line. That would cost significantly more than the solar array, and we kill the project. So the point of our recommendation tonight is to avoid exactly that situation. The purpose, we want to clarify the existing policy. We have provided updated policy language to clearly address the treatment of customer-owned renewable generation, especially for public agencies. We want to support compliance with state requirements, enable these public agencies to meet Oregon's mandate to invest 1.5% of new building costs in green energy technology. We want to address technical challenges. That's a very nice way of saying those expensive challenges. And resolve that impracticality and cost issues associated with directly connecting to the grid. We also want to maintain our pricing philosophy, ensure the consistent application of current pricing structures as we move this forward. So a little bit more on that pricing philosophy, since I know you all are in the mood to talk about pricing. Customer-owned direct generation, it's predominantly solar power. Not a lot of rooftop wind turbines here in Eugene. Solar is great, it's clean, it's quiet. It can be located almost anywhere. It also only produces when the sun is out. It is fundamentally different than load service, which is delivered in exactly the quantity you want in exactly the moment you want it. EWEB, like other utilities, we meticulously calculate the exact retail service costs through the budget and cost of service analysis. Adam agonizes over these questions day and night, I assume, Adam. And he runs this cost of service analysis, and it looks something like this. We start out with all of our costs, and we start chopping them up into little pieces so that we can allocate them as most fairly as we possibly can. The direct generation rate, it doesn't look like this. It is based entirely around the value that these intermittent generating resources provide. And so the price that we pay through that direct generation rate is different than that retail rate. So if there's any point to take away from this, it's that the DG rate and the retail rate, they're apples and oranges. We try to keep these different because they are different. So let me give an overview of how these systems look. For direct generation, we have over there at the far right. Maybe that button will work. No, the button doesn't work. Over there at the far right, we have the grid, EWEB. We connect to this customer through two different meters. We have separate service drops, one for the consumption meter and one for the production meter. For this particular customer, their solar array generates 10,000 kilowatt hours in that month. And their consumption meter shows the building consumes also 10,000 kilowatt hours in that month. So for the month, they are net zero. On their bill, we charge them for that 10,000 kilowatt hours that they consumed based on our retail rate. And we also compensate them for the 10,000 kilowatt hours that they produced at that direct generation rate. For a behind the meter system, this array, this looks a little bit different. So for net metering, we have, instead of two service drops of 2 meters, we have one service drop to a bi-directional meter. In this array, we've got the exact same building. They are also producing 10,000 kilowatt hours from their solar panels and consuming 10,000 kilowatt hours on site. But because they consume some of that solar that they generate at the time that it's generated, it doesn't all flow back to EWEB. So we don't see 10,000 in and 10,000 out. We see it this bi-directional meter, 5,000 in and 5,000 out. So with a net metering arrangement, which is what our residential customers typically have, it's very cheap and easy. They're billed with the separate line items at the 5,000 in and the 5,000 out. Okay, for the larger customers that we're trying to help with the recommended updates that you have in the packet, we are proposing to do a virtual metering arrangement where we can rely on a production meter located here to measure exactly how much power they are producing from their solar array. So by doing this, we can then calculate how much they must be consuming on site. So we can do the math to look at that production meter, look at the bidirectional meter and say, okay, we know this much is being produced, we know this much is flowing back to us or not. Therefore, on an hourly basis, we know how much power that facility must be consuming. So then we can do that calculation and we can compensate them at the DG rate for what they're producing and bill them the retail rate for what they are consuming. So this presentation, I will confess I made this very late at night and it doesn't have a proposal next step on it. This is a pet peeve of Frank's to not have a next step slide on this. The recommendation is to adopt the updated language that we have in the packet. It is all laid out. Adam is the expert on that, who wrote the language. But if you have any questions, we are happy to answer.
Yeah, Mindy.
Okay, I'm gonna need you to simplify this a little bit for me, which you probably think it's already simple. But let's say, for instance, if we can just use like University of Oregon, because you brought them up. So University of Oregon wants to build something. What would change?
So right now with the University of Oregon, we have two things we can offer them. They could net meter, which would be to put in a 25 kW array, which is a drop in the bucket compared to University of Oregon's energy consumption. Or they could directly connect a generator to our grid, which is what they do now with their existing on-site generation. The powerhouse there is quite convenient to our distribution. So if they add something new at their power facility, they could. But if they wanted solar in the back of the campus, that would be a nightmarish problem for them. So the proposal is to allow them to put it in the back of the campus. We'll put a meter on that generator there, then do the math to separate out that generation from their load.
I would say the difference in this, I'll call it a calculated approach, is that the solar generation does not have to be near the EWEB system. Right now, if they started putting throughout campus and we had to meter this, we would have to meter it back at a singular location. We would require these generating meters, whereas now we can put a meter by it and we can actually, in essence, calculate their load from it. Where this becomes beneficial is really, and that's where it was designed, these sort of larger entities that want to do solar. In some cases, the infrastructure piece is more than the solar piece, and this simplifies it, basically.
So would this increase large scale solar installations here in Eugene?
Yes, I believe so.
And then what's the downside, or what would somebody think is the downside to this?
Automating it in the billing system is a pain, so the key account staff will have to do the math. I can see them not loving that. It's a cheap price to pay though.
Then I absolutely support it.
Borowski.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that this is being driven by the state's 1.5% green energy. And I think right now that their solar just doesn't pencil out to do that, to fulfill that requirement. So that people are looking at other options to hit that 1.5%. And I think this is a good way for it to make it more affordable to use solar to hit that number, especially on public projects. And I hope that would also help to incentivize non-public ones that are not forced to do that. What's the difference in the cost of the retail and the generated price?
So let me give you a teaser. We will be back next month to talk more about that. Right now, though, we set the DG rate last year when the power market was extremely high. So the direct generation rate is currently 10.5 cents a kilowatt hour compared to medium commercial at something like 7 cents a kilowatt hour. So they are in fact being paid more for their generation than the retail rate right now.
Right.
That has not historically been the case.
Right.
Power market has cooled off some. I would expect it to come down pretty substantially next time. But yeah, right now it's quite good.
Sure, it historically has been whatever the retail rate is, the low teens totaled all up versus 3, 4, 6 cents. That's been the difference historically.
And then I guess the other question that I would have is existing customers right now that have the two-way meters, could they switch and get, would it incentivize them as well to switch?
So the proposed language would make the, this behind the meter direct generation available only to arrays that are between 25 kW and 200 kW. That's an interesting thought on whether smaller arrays might want this.
Or even a large one? So, you know, we do have a few that are large, no?
Yeah, we do. There, because a lot of the cost that's being saved is the installation cost, there would be no real benefit to doing it after.
So the rates would change. Okay, thank you.
Correct, thank you.
Just a clarifying question about difference, large scale solar. Give me a geographic footprint of what's called large scale solar.
Sure, a typical residential rooftops installation might be 5 to 10 kW. This would be 25 to 200.
Okay, but that's KWs, but how much land area or roof area? Are we talking about doing this on rooftops or we're taking, because I know there's a lot of opposition to the project. And are we talking about projects of that scale?
A commercial solar installation is probably more like a megawatt or larger.
Okay, so that's 10 acres, 20 acres?
For a megawatt, gosh, I think it's more like a couple acres per megawatt.
So this would take land if we do this large scale.
For a 200 kW, that's a fifth of a megawatt. I would guess this would mostly be on rooftops and commercial buildings.
Yeah, Commissioner Brown, this is going to be on an industrial building.
Warehouses.
Pepsi is a good example. I think it's about 200 if you know that building.
API and those, that's fine. I just needed to know that definition because of the Muddy Creek project and seeing what's happening there.
And the reason that there's a cap at 200 is that at 200, we start to get into specific billing requirements from Bonneville. So we have a lot of freedom between 25 and 200. That's why that cap was set. It wasn't a physical limitation.
I thought we had some different regulatory things that hit at 20. Oh, sorry. I thought we had some other regulatory rules and regulations and such that set in at 25. That was another reason why that piece was set. What's that difference?
Answer to you.
I think I know, but if you know, you should go.
There's a state requirement for net metering up to 25 kilowatts. There is no requirement beyond 25 kilowatts. So if utilities are required to offer net metering, which displaces the retail rate, which is typically higher, up to 25 kilowatts, not beyond that. So that's the 25 kilowatt threshold that you're talking about.
Okay, and so there's no, I mean, other than the admin cost, which there is a slight admin cost, it sounds like that's pretty nominal compared to the overall cost. There's really no other costs. It's just a savings in putting in giant infrastructure that's unneeded necessarily.
Yes.
Okay, great. Then I'm supportive. Done. Thanks.
So I just have one question, and that is, why haven't we gone down this road before? Math.
Math, yeah. A combination of math, competing priorities, and getting organizational alignment around making the change.
I would say also we've had a number of cases in the last year or so where this barrier was kind of became enlightened for us. I know this is an issue that you kind of, this 1.5% has been on your mind for a while, but you know, we've had a couple of particular cases where this particular investment barrier was one that came up. That it isn't always the case, but we've had a few cases and it really made you know, Rod and Brian and Adam and others get together and say, well, this is a barrier with our new systems and ways of metering. Is there a way we can solve this? So we had some specific cases to build on.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate the thinking and problem solving to get us to this spot. I think this is a great move. I'm certainly supportive. I do wonder if there's any thinking about moving that 25 kW limit up. If that's part of this conversation. I mean, I know it's not on our agenda tonight, but is there any rationale in revisiting that at the same time we're thinking about updating this?
I would say that's part of a rate design discussion. There is cost associated with that move. especially when you consider in the retail rate, not all the fixed costs are absorbed in the variable piece. So now you're talking about expanding credit in the variable section. So it certainly is something we should be at some point addressing, but it is very much related to rate design. And so I'd say that's a topic that will come up in that.
Yeah, that comes, for me, it comes into the question too about community scale solar, opportunities to do larger installations that people can buy pieces of if they don't have them up available. My perspective, that'd be a valuable conversation to have around all of those. I know in the past, we haven't had a growing load, but we're seeing an increase in load, now and into the future. And so it seems like there's more opportunity for us to think about where and how we might fill some of those gaps with that kind of project.
And although it wasn't in this context, there's always a little bit of a hidden theme in some of the questions that you just got asked around what about cost today versus cost in the future? But what about avoided cost today versus avoided costs in the future? Solar in summer peaking conditions with a combination of storage might be worth more in the future than it is today. Well, it will be worth more in the future than it is today. And do we start to incentivize or capture that, even though there might not be that cost justification today? So there was some of the things that you don't think you answered earlier, you did answer in some way, so indirectly.
Yeah, motion
I'd move that we adopt resolution 2411.
moved by Brown, second by Schlossberg. All in support, say aye. Aye, passes unanimously. We'll take a break up to 10 minutes, but if people are back and ready to go before then, we'll get started earlier. I'll see you. And going right to EWEB Enterprise Systems. You.
Hi. Hi, Commissioners. Julie McGahee, Chief Customer Officer, Travis Knabe, CIO. We are here to update you on EWEB Enterprise Solutions. So we are going to talk about a status of the project. We're going to remind ourselves why we're doing this project. We're going to talk about what's been happening in the last few months since we've seen you, and then we'll give you a preview of what's coming next.
So if we jump right into it, so we wanted to give a quick 10,000 foot view. And so what we're looking at here is my creativity of the three legs of the project management stool, right? Scope, schedule, budget. So scope, as you can see, is very green, and we'll talk a little bit about that later in the presentation too, of how scope can create some tension with other things that are happening. Schedule, a little bit yellow. Oh, and I also want to remind scope, we bit off a pretty good chunk here with the scope of this project. We're doing our customer information system, which is a billing system, as well as a pretty massive upgrade to the customer portal and then our financial system. So this is a pretty significant effort. The reason we have schedule a little bit yellow here is we're still on track to go live in Q4 of 2024, which is what the goal says. We did originally have a plan to go live in November, at the beginning of November, and sat and looked at the work that needed to be done, and we did postpone by a month, and now our current live date is scheduled for the beginning of December. And so that's why, partially too, we have a little bit of yellow on the budget. The month delay does cost a little bit of money, and the other reason there is we made some estimations on SAP license costs, and those have gone up a little bit as well. I am happy to report, though, there's not a slide at the end of this asking for budget. We're still well within our board policy and approved budgets and what we all talked about over the last couple of years. So just a quick reminder of why we're moving from legacy to modern, and there's obviously a lot of reasons in there in the middle, but we wanted to throw a couple of them out here just as a reminder. Security controls, as you've seen on the news, I'm sure, cybersecurity, the climate we live in, it's important to us that we protect our customer data. And so that was one of the big things, right? Remembering legacy systems being 20 and 30 years old for our CIS system and our financial system, security controls, a big win for us here. Centralization, we talked a little bit about, do we go best of breed? Do we have a product like SAP, which is where we ultimately landed, where we have centralized applications, centralized data. We do look at our data as an asset. It's important to decision-making processes, and so we wanted to centralize that data. We also looked at, we're in the mid-game of the strategic plan and how this was a building block. We also talked a little bit about how it was a ticket to participate in the game in general. And customer opportunities. So you had a very robust conversation about rate design. We talked about things like time of use. And what this allows us, what a modern system will allow us to do is implement those standard programs like rate design. But it also allows for some creativity in customer programs and services that we might offer that we just haven't been able to do based on our current technology. So what's been happening? We've kind of killed ourselves with these slides a little bit because we had some late breaking news. We tried to go from one slide to the next, and then we've inserted a tangent. And so I'll talk about the tangent when we get there. But we did kick the project off officially in Q2 of 2023 and went through about a 6-month design phase where the teams were looking at what do we need to do? How do we take what we do today in these disparate systems and implement them into SAP? And then at the end of 2023, around December, we started building and are wrapping the build phase up and starting the test phase, and then we'll go into training. So that's where we're at right now. We're in our second of 5 test cycles, and this is where we'll take a tangent in a few slides to talk a little bit about testing. I do want to also mention, Commissioner Carlson, you asked a question early on in one of the presentations that was, what's different this time? And one of the things, we talked about a couple different things that were different. One of them was change management. And is the business ready for the change? Are we ready to
adopt something so massive as this transformation project. And so I want to talk a little bit about that. Did a change readiness survey. Well, sorry, don't want to get ahead of myself. We started a very robust change management program prior to the kickoff. And so the arrow really is pointing back into 2022. And then we did a change readiness survey, the first of 3, our second ones will happen here in August. And this was a cross section of the utility, not just people that are focused on the project or dedicated to the project, but across the utility. So do you understand why we're behind EES? And as you can see, 90% of the respondents said, yeah, we understand why we're doing this. 75% said they're aware of the goals. 75% noted that they're regularly updated. And then the big one in my mind here is 86% agree that they're well equipped to manage the change that's coming. And it is going to be a big change. It's going to be a change from process. It's a change of an application that people are used to using every day. And if you remember from the previous slide, training hasn't even started yet. And so we feel really good about these numbers. And we've been told by our consultants that these are really high numbers. And so, of course, then the team's also adjusted their change management strategy because we do want to bring these 75% up and continue with the high numbers. And now we're going to take this weird tangent that I talked about.
Detour slide. So back on the timeline slide, it said test, test, test. And that is not an understatement. We are doing a lot of testing. Pretty much the whole project team right now is involved in various different kinds of testing. So it is a very timely detour into one of these tests that we just want to talk to you about. It's late breaking news. We just got these results Thursday of last week and we're kind of excited and proud about them. So a parallel bill test is how we measure bill accuracy to our customers. Probably the most important thing as we embark upon a billing system changeover is making sure that our customers are getting the right bill, they're saying the right things. So this is what we do. We do 2 rounds of parallel bill testing. This is the first round that we just completed. And what it is you take, in this case, 2 cycles. So billing cycle 1 and billing cycle 4, and you run a whole set of bills out of that system. And then you do the exact same cycles during the exact same time and you run it out of the SAP system. And then we have some kind of tool that compares them. And so the results that we got were a 91% exact match for cycle 1 and 98% match for the next cycle. And according to our consultants, this being the first time we've done this, extraordinary results, like off the charts, like people were speechless that we got results like this. And we really attribute it to a lot of work that was done in the front end by the team to do data cleansing, to do data matching, to do data conversion. So we're really proud and happy about it. And what we'll also do then, so this was the automated kind of match that we do. We'll also have people on the billing and the customer service teams who will actually put eyes on these sets of bills, like make sure the bill looks right, everything is where it's supposed to be, there aren't any anomalies on the bill, and that's another round of checking. Deloitte, our consultant, will then go back in and try to figure out in cycle 1, what was the 9% we got wrong, make some tweaks. And then we have one more round of parallel bill testing, parallel bill test 2, and we'll actually go in and run all 21 of our bill cycles just like this to make sure that we got it right, we got the glitches out, and we'll do another round of visual site testing. So that's what's going on. This is just one example of what we're doing to ensure that we have quality data. It's a quality product that we can feel good about. So what's next? We are coming to you one more time before go live in October, and we're going to talk to you about our go live plan, all of the activities leading up to go live. It is not lost on us that our go live date is the weekend of Thanksgiving. So we will be making some special plans with our staff, with our customers to do some things on the front end during the cutover and afterwards to make sure we have a really smooth transition. Travis mentioned this is a big project that impacts a high percentage of the people at the utility. So we'll also talk a little bit about utility and staff impact, customer impact at go live and beyond, what's going to change and how we help them through that process. And then we'll come back to you with a communications plan that the team is actually working on right now. It's communications out to the customers, communications internally, but we also want to help you guys feel comfortable in that as we're getting ready to launch it afterwards, you have some tools that you feel comfortable taking out and talking to customers in the community about the project.
And then what's next for EES? I don't know if you caught on the first slide, I was supposed to highlight it and forgot to. We're calling our phases seasons. And so if you remember early days, we had season 1 was customer information billing portal. Season 2 was the WAM replacement. And then season 3 was our human resources replacement. Through reflection, lessons learned, as we talked about scope being green and I talked about tension there, we've had to say no to things. We've had to be very disciplined in maintaining our scope. And so we have this list of things over here in the parking lot that we would still like to get done that have come out of these design sessions and have come out of the build sessions and have come out of the testing sessions. And so we want to do a couple things. And so if we start at the top, yep, we're going live this year. As we go down to season 2, we want to take the time for a stabilization period of the system. We want to look at what we built. We're calling it the year of continuous improvement. What did what we build meet the goals and achieve what we were trying to do? Are there things that we need to adjust? And then also look at things that we had to say no to and things we had to take off the table. And when we talked about this program being a transformative program, we also want to look at doing projects differently at EWEB where people don't feel like they have to get everything they want done right away, which then extends timelines, which extends costs, as opposed to saying we're going to maintain our scope and then we can come back and fill in the gaps that we either missed or were later identified. The other thing that we want to do that we think is really important is really look at the strategy for the next phase before we jump into it. And I've got it starting in 2025, but really Karen Kelly has already started an asset management strategy. And as you know, managing $1 billion of assets, it's important that we have a good strategy for doing that. And so we've started that process, and then we'll kick off in 2026 the WAM replacement and the field service management implementation. And then again, we're going to rinse and repeat and do that stabilization again, the continuous improvement, and then develop that strategy for human resources. And then we'll go into the human resource implementation and then rinse and repeat the stabilization and continuous improvement phase again. And as you can see, we're out into 2029. Like this is a big deal, and it's been a lot of effort. And so now I'm going to throw the next slide in that was also not planned. Surprise everybody. So I want to talk a little bit about the people. And I'm already struggling with this because we've got 25 staff that have been dedicated to this project full time. They've stepped away from their jobs that they were hired to do. They've not taken vacations. They haven't taken days off. They've missed time with their families. And now to thank them, we're going to go live over the Thanksgiving Day weekend. And I just really want you all to be aware and to feel so proud of this team that has dedicated so much time and effort into this project and maintain that scope and maintain that discipline. And then that's not even to mention the trickle down effect where we've asked people to step up into roles that we've moved people out of, right? So you've got this movement from one step to the next, and we just couldn't be more proud of this team. And we want you all to just understand how proud of them we are and how proud of them you all should be. It's kind of a thankless job right now. You think about building a building and you can see the floors going up. On this one, you can't. And there's just going to be this kind of unveiling at the end of the year. And people are going to get an opportunity to play armchair quarterback and say, oh, we should have done this and we should have done that. And we just need to provide this team so much support. And then the 45 staff, again, training is going to come up and we're going to ask these people to help do user acceptance testing and training. And it's just a joy for us to see. And we're just so proud of them and wanted to share that with all of you.
I would just add on and say we do get emotional when we talk about this, and we see how hard these teams work every day and we see their dedication. And I think for me what's really special is we're working with consultants who have done hundreds of these projects, and they regularly tell us that the people who they work with at EWEB care more. They care about the quality of the project and of the product. They care about a legacy that they're leaving behind for their peers, for their friends at EWEB, for their customers. And even when it gets really hard, that's what they're driving towards. It's just this sense of responsibility that they have, who apparently not all projects people feel that way. So I think it just makes us very proud to be sponsors on this project.
And that's it.
Sonia?
Well, great presentation, wonderful outcome. Thank you for the acknowledgement on, how it's different. Because it's interesting. It definitely has felt different. Things are moving forward. We're getting good updates. It's not this back and forth. It's like, here's where we're at on the timeline and it's still going. So that's perfect. I had a couple of questions and comments. One, so why Thanksgiving specifically? Is that a
So we kind of looked at two really bad options and tried to pick the best of the two. Some of it's cost, another month delay. Well, first of all, we want to go live at the beginning of the month, right? We want to close the books in 1 month and then start the next one. I think that there would actually be a strong desire from finance to go live at the beginning of the year.
to do other holiday?
But then you're doing it over the other holiday.
Right.
And then there's additional cost with an additional month delay. And so it was kind of the best of a couple bad choices.
Okay, all right. I am curious if there's been discussion, because my assumption is that when this goes live, that there, as any project, there are the unknowns. And so you go live and it might cause some hiccups for our customers. Is there a plan in place to suspend turnoffs and such, because it's during the holiday time period too, so people are already emotional and it's the end of the year and people have higher costs and all of those things. So is there?
I think that's one of the benefits of working with, that was me. Yeah, that's one of the benefits of working with a system integrator like Deloitte, who has done this. They have templates for us to use and they have history to show, when we should stop turning people off, when we should stop taking move-ins, when we should, a whole bunch of things. They're helping us with how to staff up, because we know that these calls are going to take twice as long with people who are just new to the system. So they have a whole ramp plan for us. And we'll definitely share that in October.
And so when you do the switch over, when do bills then come out? Typically after that month, I don't know.
Yeah, so one of the things that we talk about, having a little flexibility, we know it's Thanksgiving, and so we have a couple levers we can pull. I mean, we can stop doing things a little bit before the whole Thanksgiving weekend, and we can delay turning things back on a little bit further after the Thanksgiving weekend, if it makes sense and if that's something that we choose to do. So, if we don't want people working on Thanksgiving, we have a couple options there. Bills should come back on pretty quickly after, but we can choose, to keep our collection cycle off for some amount of time.
I just meant, so for customers receiving the bill after the transition happens, do they get it a couple of days after? There's a number of cycles, so I'm assuming there's kind of a chunk in each, and then, some people get it the first week, some people get it the second week, some get third, and so forth.
Yeah.
Okay, so
my understanding is that after we go live, we could send bills that first week.
Okay, so hopefully, obviously the goal would be to have a seamless transition, no customers see any change. But the reality of any project is that, there will be some things here and there, unforeseen situations. So I was just curious, some of those people are going to get the hit right that holiday time period. Do our customers, we did, great internal knowledge, change management. What are we planning for our customers in this transition and letting them know?
So the communications team has a plan that they are rolling out, and it's really more around, the The customer and the financial system will be an internal change. We're trying to mask as much change as we can. You know, we're going to have a bit of an upgraded portal, so they're going to have an experience there. A couple of the programs may change how we communicate with landlords and AHUs. We may communicate a little bit differently there. So those are the really specific pieces that the communications team is trying to do, some targeted communications to customers as we get closer. Here's what you can expect. Here's where you can go to get more information.
So there is a difference in how it looks, maybe not the bill, but the behind, like if you log in, the portal itself looks
It will look,
different.
yes, it'll look a little bit different.
Okay, so I definitely want to make sure whatever we do there, that customers are very well informed when that changeover happens. Okay, and I can ask my other questions later. Thanks.
Brown?
Congratulations on your success rate. I wouldn't run it again if I got 98% on it. That's good. So
That's why you're not the chief customer officer.
So don't push it again. You make it 75 next time. So just a quick question on, you know, when we instituted WAM, we got some challenges from our auditors on that. Are you bringing our auditing team along on this or so we don't get like a $500,000 audit bill because this is all new with them? Because this is going to be a big learning curve for them too, to do an audit on our performance with a whole new system on every aspect. And so are you coordinating with them? Are you talking to them, or are we just going to surprise them?
We were looking at each other, figuring out who was going to answer this. So yes, we have been in communication with our auditors and our internal controls, specifically. I'll get better at that. On our internal controls specifically, we work with them to identify potential vendors to help us build that system out. So there will be it'll be a new system for them, but that was part of continuing with the same audit team for another year to make sure that we had at least business continuity, and we should not be being hit with a surprise bill because they actually quote the work for us.
Well,
So
thank you.
we're bringing them along.
I know
Yes.
qualified audit, you know, if they find mistakes, then they don't have compassion sometimes.
Yeah, Commissioner Brown, when we went through the audit this last sort of early part of the year, I did ask Keith
Simovic,
the partner, if he felt comfortable that we were bringing them in and consulting with them and informing them of what we're doing. And he said, absolutely, yes, that they were coming in, we were consulting with them. I would also point out that Deloitte has an auditing background as well. So between the two of them, we feel pretty comfortable that they're going to be comfortable with it. So
thank you.
Cindy?
I have a question. Will the update for the customer information system and the customer portal, is it just for billing, or will it also like kind of modernize some of the clunkiness of our website with like accessing in like what incentives are available to customers or things like that? Or is it strictly just the bill?
So it's not just the bill, but it's also not the website. So we're upgrading our customer information system. There's, it's meant to give us a 360-degree view of the customer. So what it's going to give us is all of our systems kind of feeding into one place. So when you call in or when we send a mailer to you, we know some things about you and we can target our communications, and we have more information so you don't need to share as much information. We're also going to deliver some more self-service options on the portal, so you don't have to call us if you don't want to. So those will be the improvements. What we'd like to do, though, is over time, take our portal as the basis and start integrating our website there. So it is more of one experience as you move through. Maybe it's from the website to the portal. If you need to call a CSA, you need to, have an email back. It's all one experience is what our goal is. That one might take a little time though with the website.
Thank you.
Thanks. Couple of things. One, when you're running the test, you got the 91% and you got the 98%. when you had ones that didn't match, there weren't any real big outliers, were there? I mean, I don't want to have on the front cover of the San Francisco Chronicle, Eugene Water and Electric Board customer charged $1.2 million for the month of December. We haven't gotten any huge outlying ones, correct?
We haven't seen any of that. They haven't done a root cause analysis yet. They just did the parallel bill test. Like I said, we just got the results last week. They just ran it last week. And then they're gonna look and see, why did these kick out? But we haven't heard anything of the realm of.
Okay, and that's great. I mean, I just,
Likely more outsorted or something wrong with the business partner or. things like that.
What I can tell you about cycle one, which did have that lower match rate, is it's our cycle that has the most variety in terms of rates, residential, general service, water only, electric only. We kind of have one of almost every rate in cycle one. So it's not surprising that it had a little bit lower of a pass rate. If you're just going to get flagged on a decimal point that, wasn't set to round right, it's going to be in that billing cycle one.
and I figured as much. I just, a PR nightmare. I don't want to see that. The other thing that we hear, and I'm hoping that it's not going to be a problem, is the rollover of the auto pay. Is everybody going to have to go back in and re-enter? Because I know credit card information is tough, security and all that kind of stuff. So is everybody that's enrolled in auto pay, when we switch this over, are they going to have to go in and resubmit? Or are we going to be able to roll over their credit card information into the new system?
So you all received the email last week about the big change that we were making on the merchant services. I think Julie sent a note out. Was that last weekend or the weekend before last? That was a massive step in that direction where we moved a big chunk of the wallets over. So we now have to take the data that's in the current system and convert it to the new system. I know I'm not answering your question with a yes or no, but there's definitely a conversion process for auto pay schedules, users, those types of things. A big, huge step in that direction was achieved with this latest migration of the wallets.
And so when we migrated the wallets, we didn't lose their information. We could actually migrate it over. They don't have to resend, submit it.
We had 100% success.
Okay, great. Because that's one of the ones that when that happens, we hear about it because the people, you hear about it, but we also hear about it. So that's good to know. And then I guess the last question. So we're contracting with SAP. The data that we have that's going up into the cloud, do they have the ability to monetize that data, or do we have the ability to monetize that data, or is anybody ever going to be monetizing the data that we're collecting?
So the software that we purchased is SAP, and it's in a private cloud that we pay a monthly fee for. So our data isn't mixed with any other SAP data, and they don't have access to market the information that's out there.
Okay.
And so other than not knowing exactly what you mean by us monetizing that data.
Well, I mean, data is a commodity.
Absolutely.
Data is a commodity. And so I just wanted to know if, at some point we were moving it to an offsite. So I just wanted to make sure in the agreement we had that there wasn't something that they said they could monetize that data or move that on. So that's just was the question that I had. Thanks.
Frank?
I believe it's in I want to say even a board policy somewhere that or in some of our principles somewhere that says that we are not using customer data for any other purpose other than our own. And, Julie mentioned a few things around programs and services. That would be for our own use. We are not going to be selling customer data.
think it's in our customer service policy.
Yeah, that's what, yeah, the very forefront of that.
Are there regulations as well that prevent, I mean, I remember we couldn't even send an email to our customers about certain things because of how they opt in, like,
There are certain privacy regulations as well.
Travis, we talked about this system and the need for the new system when I first started on the board, like almost. It's been a huge amount of planning and work to get here, and congratulations for sure to getting to this step where you're so close to flipping the switch. And thanks to the team who's done all the, like you said, you know, just behind the scenes, really not, you know, not sexy. We're not seeing it. We're all just kind of waiting for it. But, you know, really appreciate the effort of the that's involved and your leadership to get us here with really great results. So thank you. I'm also super excited about the doors that this opens for us. I know we've been talking about time of use pricing, and in the past, it's been like, well, even if we had automated metering systems, we don't have a billing system that can do that. So, you know, this is a foundational system for both utilities, and the doors that are going to open up with this are huge. So thank you for all the work to get here. It's been a long haul. So thank you. Appreciate the effort. Anything else? Yeah, please.
John Brown could probably tell you. John could probably tell you it's been even longer than that. I'm curious, will we have date payment flexibility now with this new system? If people wanted to like switch the date that so it's not on the third week, it's on the first week, so it better matches when they get paid, so that, I don't know if that's something that.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I know we have a pay later function. I'm not sure if we'll have a full choose your own date when you want to.
When you pay, like the bill is due here, but I want to pay it a week in advance to make sure that it goes out.
I can check. I'm not sure yet what the exact rules are.
I'm curious if the new system might be able to handle over time, not initially, but the situation that we just made with this new policy, the 1.5%, I know we have to handle it beforehand, but is there an option that we could potentially automate that so it's not an issue for staff?
Well,
I'm certain with the flexibility.
Yeah, we were sort of putting our heads together as you were talking about that, and Anna Wade actually chimed in and said she doesn't believe it's going to be really manual even in our current system. So I kind of think if our current system can do it, our SAP system would be able to do it in a little more automated fashion, but we can certainly check.
Great. Will our past bills be carried over too? We'll be able to see those in September. Will that like wipe it out? So if yes, I think we should let people know so they can download bills.
We're definitely pulling over 13 months of billing history, and then the legacy data is being managed. There's still some strategy development around data warehousing and that kind of thing. We would definitely have to look into what the plan is for actual downloading PDF bills.
Okay, all right, and then I'll just thank you. This is really amazing. I've been my whole time on the board, we've been talking, so I'm very excited. Thanks.
Great. Both on to the next item, quarterly strategic and operational report for Q2, Mr. Lawson.
It's actually the strategic plan update.
No, I jumped ahead. Annual strategic plan review, Commissioner perspectives. I tried. John.
Yeah. Commissioners, thank you. The one thing I will add just on the last subject as well. Commissioner Brown was not the only one who was around during the work and asset management process that was done in the early 2010s-ish to 2014 kind of time frame. One of the other big differences, because I know Commissioner Carlson, you asked about some of the big differences. Leadership is a big difference, and I have to credit, Deborah and Travis and Julie and their teams for really taking ownership in this program, because it's not just one project, but the the overall program, the organization, as you can see, 70 people working on this. A recognition that it is both tactically and sort of fundamentally important. It's foundational, but also, to your point, Commissioner, it's opens up the opportunity to do new things. And so the discipline required around the scope creeping elegance, as we might call it, recognizing that you saw continuous improvement mentioned several times, the fact that we're changing the cycle of development here. You don't have to put everything in the first revision and take years to do that, which creates a whole nother problem. And so really have to commend Travis and Julie and Deborah and their teams for what they're doing here. And that's a huge difference. Not just the fact that we're looking at change management differently, but I think that's a big piece of it. So now onto my part. So really appreciate the opportunity. I know you got this information probably a month ago. We postponed this from last month's meeting. Just a couple of kind of the bottom line up front. I have recommended in our present time frame that we look at developing a new strategic plan, primarily focused starting potentially a little bit later this year to try to capture whatever brain cells we can from Commissioner McCray, but also really launching into the development of a new strategic plan throughout 2025. I've been working some with Kelly Hale on kind of what that might look like from a process perspective. So far, we have at least 6 touch points with the board throughout next year, and really feel like it's the appropriate time to do that. And the reason it feels that way is that the present strategic plan, for example, talks about rate design. It talks about metering. It talks about BPA and that contract. It talks about EES and the building blocks from a customer and a finance system. But the question becomes, how do we now use that? What's next? How do we optimize that? To Commissioner Brown's question earlier around why, why are these the building blocks that they are, and how do we now apply those going forward? And this is really the time to do that under the real scope of a strategic plan, which should identify what we're doing, and maybe even just as important, what we say we're not going to do. And so how are we going to be intentional? Even the conversation around rate design and being intentional with that, I think has to be driven strategically from this board in conjunction with management and leadership. There are, under the existing plans, a few recommendations. One of them has to do with just really looking at, we had some phrases in there around intentional outcomes. We've kind of changed that to linking it a little bit more to 2 terms. One is fulfilling mission, which is what we do today, but also pursuing vision, which is the future. So we're kind of trying to set that and tighten that up just a little bit, because we do have both of those are important, and that'll be an important part of new development. And then there's a couple other things reflecting some conditions and changes and other things. The goal would be to get whatever feedback we can today, and then either via consent count, or if we need more discussion as an agenda item, come back next month. Won't talk, this is really that kind of schedule. I've already talked about that. We do have a history with this strategic plan, really developed throughout 2017, revised a number of times for sort of continuous improvement, evolutionary kinds of work. Really appreciate the dynamics and the fact that the board is willing to tee this up and reevaluate and check to make sure it's still applicable. And in essence, we see it is still applicable. We don't expect a new strategic plan to be a student body left shift. There will be a lot of things that continue, but it is an opportunity to refresh the basis of which we want to now move forward. We did develop phases. You can see actually we're in this sort of central phase down in the bottom right. Advanced metering sounds familiar. All those things, integrated resource planning, rate design, informational systems, looking at resiliency, both water and electric. Those should sound familiar because if you look at where we're investing, those are the things that we're investing in. And so it's really a credit to the board over the last number of years and the development of this that we've been able to work through this strategic process and have these things be pretty consistent with what we started out to do. Now, there's more to come, and now we have to figure out what's next, and we will. But feel pretty good about the fact that we're in the middle of this time frame and kind of in the middle of the plan. So when you look at the scope and the results versus the schedule, we're about where we thought we would. I can't say we're exactly where we want. We're probably a year late, 2 years late on a couple of things, but COVID also snuck in there on us, sort of a minor distraction. Again, a couple of the things I know that the board has seen this, so recognizing some of the issues that we're dealing with around the dynamics of the operating environment, recognizing that there's kind of discrete events and then there's gradual events that we're dealing with, tying it to the vision. I know that there was public testimony around customer owners. We're recommending replacing customer owners in the mission with community, including a number of different categories of the community. This definition actually came directly from the work that the board did on SD 23, which was the definition that we were working on around the DEI policy and what does community really mean, and really appreciated that. And part of that is that when you use the term customer owner, people tend to think that individually, and we think of customer owners collectively or at large, and you as a board represent all of the customers. You don't now you appreciate the fact that individual customers contribute and that you take those into consideration, but in general, we are looking at the impact we have collectively at large of the community, and that was the basis for this for your consideration. I did appreciate Joe Moll's recommendation around watershed conservation. Have no issue if the board wants to make that change. I would defer to you. It seems to make a lot of sense. What we were trying to demonstrate here was we had a very specific issue that we were addressing beginning in 2020, and we think there's now a transition to something that is more sustainable at a more sustainable level long term, building upon what we had transitioned to when we went from watershed protection to watershed recovery based on the Holiday Farm fire, but recognizing that there's some different objectives and intent going forward. And then also really recognizing that the first phase of the strategic plan was around customer confidence. I would include employee and commissioner confidence in that as well. And the fact that one of the bases for developing and strengthening that has to do with compliance. And that was not listed originally, but when we think about the environment we're operating in and the importance and the reliance that we have and the dedication we have to being compliant, that seemed like it warranted the highest level of recognition in the strategic plan. I think that's where I was going. I did have the exact text as a reference if you need to refer to that, but President McCray, I would just defer back to you if commissioners have any other gaps that they see that need to be filled.
All right, start with Brown and then.
I think just for reference, Joe's comment was 4.3G.
Okay,
I'll work for protection to conservation and comes into the rest of it.
Thanks for the clarification. I'll double check the formatting.
Yeah.
If you go back to the previous slide. On the protection versus recovery, I mean, I appreciate moving from recovery to protection. That makes a lot of sense to me. On the conservation side, for me, protection is just stronger language. So I would prefer more to the protection side, but maybe it's a different section. And then I think we had customer owners specifically because we were trying to call out that we are a public utility. And so having that so that people understand that this is their utility was a part of that language. And I don't know if maybe most people don't really read the mission, so maybe it doesn't really matter. But to me, that was kind of an important distinction. So I'd like to know more about why community has more of a meaning than customer.
Yeah, Commissioner, I think it was originally developed to sort of reinforce that, as you mentioned. I think when we would look at the definition of owner, and even in our case, individual customers are not owners in the sense that maybe they think they are under that term. Community seemed to be a little bit broader way of representing the fact that we are a community-owned utility. And so that was the basis for looking at this. It was just a little bit more broad, and yet it defined the key stakeholders without sending maybe a mixed message, which is, no, you really don't cash out your stock in this particular situation. That yes, we are part of the city of Eugene and its charter. And that I would say would be part of our discussion when we get into a new strategic plan is when we look at our mission. There's some work to be done around the mission when it comes to what we're doing and who we're doing it for and what we're not doing. But the basis for using community was kind of transition that a little bit. But you're right. That's the risk that you bear if you don't put that in there. Is it super clear?
It's a little more friendly. I mean, customer owners sounds kind of funky. So I guess take it back. I'm supportive of community. Thanks.
Commissioner Carlson, the only time I've really heard customer owner is when someone individually wants something from us. I'll just say it that way. I mean, it's, and we all deal with the collective, and that means individuals are important, but the only time I've really heard it used by a customer is when they individually want their way.
Got it. Well, and other than that, I mean, I'm still very supportive of what we have going on in the strategic plan. Like you said, we're kind of in the middle of it, and we have a lot of projects that are underway that keep moving forward. So I don't feel like there's a big turn here or there, and I'm supportive of all suggested changes for it.
Rofsky?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm in favor of these. I do like the idea of conservation over protection. I mean, either one's fine, but yeah, I heard it. It sounded good to me, especially from who it came from. Somebody who's been protecting our rivers for years felt that was a more appropriate term. So again, I lean into the people on the ground that are doing the work and their expertise. So yeah, that's in a couple places. It's in 4.1, but it's also down in the other part. And then customer owners, yeah, no, I'm totally on board with the new language there. The smart meter opposition people used the fact that they were the customer owners again and again in their filings and in all kinds of things, and it really didn't ring true to me. On compliance, I think that's important, and I'm just wondering if you feel that I guess OSHA accept puts it in there. But yeah, I think that's important too. So I'm on board with all these changes, but moving to conservation.
Please.
One thing I'll do before submitting something for next month is I'll try to understand what the difference is between conservation and protection. Joe referred to all the things that EWEB does, and maybe all the things we do are too much. But before I come back with either conservation or protection, I'll understand really the definitional difference between those two and present something in that context, knowing that you have the final say on it.
I would support conservation too, if that seems right after you take a look. I just have, and the other changes that are in here, community, I think is an appropriate term to use. The one thing that I'm excited about that's not reflected in here, but I think could be fairly easily, is that we're doing energy efficiency conservation potential assessment, and a demand response potential. And I know those are reflected in here, that we're going to plan and design new products and programs. I think it'd be valuable maybe to add also establish goals for both efficiency and demand response, just so that we're all clear about where, what we're expecting to get out of that. So I don't know that that's a huge change, but I think establishing goals would be valuable. And that's, yeah.
One more thing. To me, the most successful strategic plans that I've worked with over the years, things always drop off. To me, that's the most important part of a strategic plan is, hey, I mean, certain things will never drop off, but there's also things on there that are goals that we want to achieve, and we've achieved them, right? And so seeing the ones that drop off, eventually smart metering will drop off, or EES will drop off. I mean, these are in this specific case, a lot of these things are long-term things. But to me, that's the best part of a strategic plan, is when we revise it, we say, hey, we accomplished this goal and it's not in our strat plan anymore because it's done. And so that, to me, that's the most exciting part of updating a strat plan, is saying, hey, we accomplished what we set out to do. Like I said, certain ones will never fall off because they're core goals and core functions of the organization. But a strategic plan to me is working to get to an end goal. So that's as important as what's on it.
You have what you need from us?
I think so. I'll take a look at your suggestion, and to Commissioner Borowski's suggestion. There were certain things, especially in phase one, that we did not want to fall off. In fact, we felt like it was important to continue those at as the basis to move forward. So I understand where you're coming from.
That was section 4.2H on new energy services.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks. Anything else? And if not, we'll roll right into the next item. That was jumping the gun on quarterly strategic and operational report.
Yeah, commissioners, again, I'll be fairly brief with this, just as the audience may or may not understand. We do publish a pretty extensive quarterly report. First of all, it's an obligation of management to the board. We also, as part of our obligation to the city, we provide that report. And I don't know if commissioners recognize this, but we do a quarterly update to the city. So we send them our quarterly report as part of what we feel is an important obligation to the city under our charter. Just a few highlights operationally. As you know, we had a really challenging first quarter from the electric financial perspective. I will also point out very specifically that the water utility did not have that same challenge in the first quarter. Now, some of that is because a bulk of the revenue for the water utility comes in the summer months. And so, but a number of reasons for that, we think we talked about that last quarter. We did see some improvement in our financial position, moving from a negative change in net position, which is really I'll say net income, if you want to look at it that way, to something that was now positive. Still a gap in the budget that staff has identified a number of different potential ways to close that, improve I think we mentioned $3 million. It looks like we have identified some means to get there before the end of the year. That's important from a long-term perspective because it launches the long-term financial plan and has an impact on cash flow, which is impacting rates in particular. What's driving that 2025 increase is not our historically challenged number of debt service coverage. It's cash and cash flow, especially going into 2026, which is when we're planning to borrow again. And so having good financial metrics before you hit 2026 is why we haven't done and proposed our sort of traditional, instead of 15, go with 5, 5, 6, or it's because it's a different challenge that the electric utility is facing. We are working on a number of different ways to mitigate that. We're hoping to come back to the board with something better than that. Part of that is how we're addressing this year so that our cash position going into next year is more favorable. A number of different, and I said, a number of different projects continuing. We have finished up our contract with UPA around the deployment of smart meters on the electric side. We are now working with staff on the remainders of sort of the I don't want to call them hanging chads, but because I would date myself, I think everybody knows here what a hanging chad is, but just sort of the residual effects to that. So we're more than 98% deployed. So we will be able to take that off the list pretty quickly from a hardware standpoint. Using and acquiring and handling the data will continue. College Hill Reservoir has kicked off. I really have to commend our marketing and communications team for how they have handled the launch of that project. The fact that we had a celebration really mitigated what could have been a very sad public. And yes, we're all sad that something built in 1938 that's a big slab of concrete is going away, but there's good reasons for it. And we really provided an opportunity for a little bit of both personal, staff, and community grieving as part of that process, and also highlighted the reasons why the new work is so important. And so we've launched into the College Hill Reservoir and current substation. I would like to work with staff to get the commissioners back out to the current substation. I know all of you went there when it was kind of a destroyed hole in the ground. I think we had Philip Peterson kind of walked everybody around. Like to get you out again and see the bright new shiny substation that is going to be commissioned. Rod, I believe is October is when that will energize. Is that roughly the plan? So we'll have 115,000 volts coming in from all types of directions into that site in October. Some of the operational improvements, some of the metrics you saw have a little bit of a hangover from Q1. There's a few things, some of the time lost days, for example, are high compared with normal, but then you compare that versus the amount of exposure hours we've had, and it's actually lower than our average. So you have to dig a little deeper into some of the data, but we are, even on call response, the year to date versus the second quarter, significantly different. Some of that because we had tens of thousands of calls during the ice storm. So a little bit of a hangover there. You kind of saw a little bit of that in a few of the reliability metrics on the electric side. But those are pretty, both the SAIDI, the sort of the system average frequency of interruption and the duration of interruption are within the 5-year sort of rolling window that we look at. And then the water metrics are good, including really no cyanotoxin reports this year. We have seen some and heard about some in other parts of the state. And then, go through really some of the operational goals. The first two very much around some of the operations with mixed results. I think I've talked about most of these already. The compliance is also, we know we have some challenges on the dam safety side, which is also impacting the Carmen license side. And yet the NERC audit was a very favorable result. We went through an audit with a consultant, learned a number of different continuous improvement pieces from that. But because of our track record with NERC, they decided not to do an on-site audit at EWEB because of the fact they felt we were responsive to and proactive in how we were looking at compliance. Same, very favorable with the lead and copper rule master plan, and that's on target. We are making and investing some, and the board approved a contract recently to help with our Oregon PUC corrections. And just to give you a little bit of background, what happens there is the PUC comes in. They do not govern rates, as you know, but they do govern some standards that say come in with polls, and they measure clearances and customer services, and they say, well, this crossarm isn't good or this clearance isn't good, and they kind of go through different parts of our system. And so we have a 5-year plan that deals with various corrections over those 5 years, and we're a little bit behind on that in the 5-year window, but have contracted and you have helped with that to recover and catch up on the PUC compliance side. Really, most of the rest of the goals are pretty much on target. We're looking, as you know, as some of these should sound familiar, EES, which you just heard about, rate design, integrated resource plan actions, which we've talked about, some of those more recently with the BPA being kind of the focus. The evolving workforce is something that Rod is looking at, particularly around some of the principles that we're developing to continue to evolve our mobile and hybrid workforce, and how that interacts with people who are both field-based and facility-based. And then the alternative funding, and the reason really that is slightly below target is that we're still evolving some of the processes to govern that. That's not that we haven't gone out and done a really good job of both pursuing, acquiring, supporting grants, but it's to develop more intentionality around which of these we will be more aggressive with and in which ones that really are not strategically aligned, and putting that process together is something that we're working on, but feel a little bit behind on that. So I think with that, I'll open up for questions, comments. Appreciate the update from staff. I know there's a lot in there, and be happy to answer any questions or research anything that we need to research for you further.
Great, thank you. Starting with Sonia.
Quick comments. I was pleasantly surprised to see that we asked candidates the reason for their interest in EWEB, and that making a positive community impact was the #1 reason by far. And that EWEB's reputation was second, and wasn't even, benefits and total compensation was 4th. I think that speaks a lot to the people who work here, and to what Travis and Julie were talking about earlier about the commitment and the passion. It shows in a number of different ways, and I love that we have that community culture here. And I know that this is probably one of the more mixed reports that I've seen during my time here, but I know it's because we're doing a lot of really big challenging things, and we're getting into some of the nitty gritty that, when you're making progress and trying to deal with those challenges, it happens. But overall, I think, great work from the whole team, and look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks.
Well, I appreciate those comments. I do think that, and I won't use this in the context of what we do now, but if everything's a green light, then maybe you're not stretching yourself enough. And so, but if you have too many red lights, then you get, so there's this line between frustration and being, bored and overwhelmed. And I think we're teetering with that because we're neither bored nor overwhelmed. Well, sometimes we're overwhelmed, but I really appreciate the board's support on these. We know that we're doing a lot of things and we're doing a lot of things kind of simultaneously. And a lot of those require kind of, even like our discussion earlier, we may have some ideas. Rate design's a really good example. We may have some ideas. We hear from the public regularly on their ideas, but we need to understand where the board is coming from when it comes to the sort of the trade-offs and the tensions between some of these things. And so we know they're not easy for you also. And so really appreciate the guidance.
We're definitely not.
You're bored, B-O-A-R-D.
Maybe. Yeah, but there's no boredom in this room. I don't think anywhere. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Right into our last item on future board agendas. Any questions or comments? Yeah, Frank.
I will only, I don't know, this works wherever I go, but that's a little scary because I was down the hall earlier. So one of the things I did hear earlier and I mentioned earlier, and I will make sure, and I'm going to look over at Ann for a second. We had talked about doing something for the board around the EV feedback in October. So I wanted to make, if that's not on there, that's certainly in our thought process. Staff has been looking at this. They know we have some commitments. There's clean fuel credits involved in this, but we also were hearing some questions, and it goes beyond just the EV program. It goes to a couple other conceptual things around the kind of the who pays and where you have that dividing line. And so there's going to have to be a little bit more background there. And to your point, Commissioner Carlson earlier, what are the real numbers behind this? I think those are things that I know Rod Price has already looked into previously that we'll update. The other thing I'll mention, I think is coming up that I'm both excited and I'm a little scared of is the conversation around the business model and what that means. You thought rate design was fun. Imagine, setting the whole course for an organization's geology going forward. What is it that, the EWEB universe is going to look like now versus what's it going to look like in 10 years or 15 years or 20 years. So that will be a very important piece that feeds rate design. It feeds strategic planning as well as a number of other things. So decisions around resources, which I know Brian Booth cares a lot about just a little bit. I know we all care about it a lot, right, Deborah? Deborah cares about it. So that's another thing that's coming up that I think is going to be pretty important. So lots of, you're not bored, hopefully.
Saying. Krofsky.
Thanks. Yeah, you just touched on another big subject. So last month we talked about BPA. This month we talked about rate design, business model. It was brought up last month, that some of these items, at least for me, I don't know about the rest of the board, but may be more conducive to a work session type of an atmosphere where it's a little bit more free flowing. Again, you also mentioned the fact of getting the last brain cells out of Commissioner McCray before he leaves. I really think it would behoove us to do a work session or so before the end of the year. Maybe we pick two of these things and say, we're going to do an hour on this or an hour on that. I don't know, just something to put out there, because for me, the one we did today, we got a lot out of it, but I think that it's still a deeper dive, at least for me. And I'm willing to, do an extra meeting for a month on a more different type of a structure, if that's the will of the rest of the body. So I just wanted to put that out there, that's something that I think these really deep issues all for me, because I walk away saying, gosh, I wish I had said this, or I wish I had asked that question. And then doing it on one-on-ones, it doesn't get the collectiveness of the board. So I just wanted to put that out.
I think we're willing and supportive to do that. I know we do have one scheduled in October. I think specifically around the BPA and resource planning. But there's no reason we can also structure sort of back to back within this time slot as well. That's if you can get through the business items quickly. Or just, which would be a longer period of time for deeper dives or staggered, or just separate word section. We'll look at all those. And we'll do them all before the end of the year.
I mean,
And
I
then
may
when
be
things
alone
come
on
out,
this.
it'd be different.
I may be alone on this, Commissioner Brown, like another meeting. For me, it would be very helpful.
I think Mindy has voiced support for that. I'm certainly supportive. I feel like deep dives and there's plenty to work on here.
And
Game.
And one thing for commissioners to think about, and I would appreciate this, and the feedback can come during our one-on-ones, is in a work session, what do you see as the key differences between a work session and what we did earlier today? Earlier today was supposed to be about interaction and listening to other people. Is it time frame, deeper dive? Is it we have a round table and there's no sort of captain at the end? I would be interested in knowing what the characteristics are that are different so that we can facilitate that.
For me, it's just the amount of time dedicated.
Like to see more scenarios where like we have talked a little bit the whole about it. I'd love to see just more of the diagrams of like, okay, well, if we did this area, what would that look like? And then we can tease out, well, how do you feel if it does this, or what do you think about, you know, if you choose this path or this path? So we can kind of tease out, oh, well, I see if we do this, then it has this other impact. And having whiteboardy type situation would be very helpful to me. In those.
Did you copy that from my office?
No, but I'd love to see what it's like now. Thanks.
For me, it's more informal setting. It's maybe sitting in more of a circle and not having the minutes thing up there, so that it can be more of a free flowing conversation, so that if John says something or poses a question, I could, I don't know, ask John, what did you mean by that? I feel like this setup still is more like you're the teacher up there and we're raising our hand and waiting our turn.
I'd like to also say that, to me, that, you know, rules, the unwritten rule is that if we have 30 minutes on the clock, you get 15 and we get 15, that's 3 apiece. It never works out that way. And then you're sitting there saying, wow, there's only 2 minutes left and 3 people to speak. So you don't say things that, and you're not allowed to, the allocation isn't there. It's not against anybody, but that's the way it works out, because we'll get on a tangent, you'll take a 20-minute response and say, oh, wait a minute, you can't burn up all our time. So if we have one agenda and one topic, we know we've got an hour, we can figure it out. But to me, that, you know, that's a little intimidating, saying we got 5 other agenda items and, you know, I have to go fishing at 3 o'clock in the morning and I don't like sitting here past 9:30. So I just think that. Anyhow.
The other thing that I might suggest, and it's not because Sonia showed that really sort of nifty looking piece of paper, is that maybe even having a huddle around a whiteboard. Because I know I can only speak for a few of us, and I'm looking at Rod, is we tend to think through visual concepts. A lot of the things we do are almost 3-dimensional in their nature, and to be able to draw things and talk about things, while it isn't necessarily sort of overly formal, it can be certainly informative. And so I think I'm understanding. I'll take it off our one-on-one check-in agenda list.
All right, Mindy?
Yeah, I just have one wrap up thing, and I just want to say, I know that we live in a time where people are very mistrustful of our public institutions, and we have people come and say really angry things to us that we don't care. But I just want to share two things that happened this week with EWEB that shows that we do care about our customers in our community. One is that I heard from a customer who moved into his house within the last year and he could not find the water main for his house. He had a contractor out, they couldn't find the water main. So he called EWEB and was talking with some customer service person who said that they would put in a request for somebody to stop by if possible, but was walking him through just some different places that he could look. So in his front yard. And as he was on the phone with the customer service person, the EWEB truck pulled up because they happened to be in the neighborhood. So that was pretty cool. And the second one is that there was some anti-Semitic graffiti on a EWEB pole out in West Eugene. And somebody had been trying to report it to somebody for a couple weeks and didn't know who to report it to. So called the city several times. And the city either told them they couldn't help them with it or didn't know what to do. And this person saw that there was a little BPA sign on the pole, so called BPA, and BPA said, actually, it's a EWEB pole, but we'll alert EWEB right away. And the next day, the graffiti was taken care of. So I really appreciate that.
I'll pass that along.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mindy. Sonia?
I also wanted to take note that there was a comment on Nextdoor. Somebody had a question about, they had said their bill went up $150 and, did anybody else have experienced this? And I read through the comments on it and many of the comments said, I didn't have that problem, my bill went down, but you should contact EWEB and talk to them. They're always very supportive. They're always very helpful. Maybe they could have somebody come out and take a look at it. And so there were many comments in there overwhelmingly of call them, they'll help. And I wanted to share that.
Ski?
So on board wrap up for me, last month I was virtual, so I didn't interact quite as much as I do. Yeah, quite as much as I do when I'm in person here. But I just wanted to put out there to staff with the rate increase that we're looking at going forward, that we're going to be looking at over the next few months. It's really important to me that you guys really look at that hard. That number that I saw, I was pretty intimidated by that. And I want you to, I understand the pressures that we have and the cash flow and those types of things. But as a commissioner, this is the one area where I really need to lean in and say rates are something that's really important. And if we can look at, I know that they're in the long term, in the capital improvement plan and stuff like that, there's a lot of projects on there that are big money projects. How much did Curran cost us, and we've got 5 more of those in there. I know every time we push something out, it costs a little bit more, but if we can look at that and sharpen our pencils on that, when you come back to me, that would be something that I'm really concerned about. When I saw that number, and I'm not even going to say it because I don't want it in the ether as much as it is, because I had a person today come to me and say, what's the rate increase going to be? Because I've got to figure out how much I have to budget for my hotels, their budget going forward. And I need to know how much it's going to be to, set my room rates. And so I said, we haven't landed on that number yet, but the one that was put out there was a little bit scary. So anything we can do to look at that and give us options moving forward would be helpful for me as a board member. Thank you.
Anything else? All right. Being adjourned.
8:29.
Snuck it in.
I was watching the clock.
I should have waited another.